All right, so good morning. Shall we go ahead and get started?
Yes.
Yes? All right, cool. I will ask you questions throughout the day, and I will expect you to answer those questions. And I might just stand here awkwardly silent until somebody answers those questions. So just bear that in mind. It can be a totally awkward day of silence while I wait for you to answer questions, or we can have fun together and you can answer those questions when I ask them. Is that cool? Is that fair? All right, so as I mentioned earlier, I'll tell you who I am in a second, but as I mentioned earlier, this is now streaming live to the internet, so you can say hi to your friends on the internet. They can't see you, but they might be able to hear you. If you happen to have found the link to the live stream already, I ask you one favor. Don't watch the live stream while you're sitting here. Or if you do, please turn off your microphone and your speakers so that we don't create a feedback loop on the live stream, because that would be terrible for all of us. And it would be even worse when you go back and want to watch this later, as if after spending the full day with me, you're going to want to do that again. But if you decide that that's a thing, you can totally do that. So good morning. My name is Nathan Harvey. I'm community director at Chef. Chef is the company behind Chef. Chef, of course, is an open source framework which you can use for free, or we can sell to you. And it's up to you how you use that. And you know, at some point today, we can probably talk about why you might want to buy Chef from us instead of just using the free version. But at the end of the day, Chef will help you solve some problems, and we'll talk about what those problems are. And I'm happy if you use them. But because my title is community director, not sales director, so it's cool. Use the free version, and I'll be happy. And you'll be happy, and then maybe you'll pay us one day. It's cool. I'm also a co-host of The Food Fight Show. The Food Fight Show is a podcast that's all about DevOps and Chef. Our tagline is it's where DevOps chefs do battle. But the truth of the matter is we don't actually fight on the show. We're usually pretty congenial. But we talk about a lot of DevOps topics and Chef specifically. Although not every episode is a Chef episode. Like, as an example, about a year and a half ago, we had a show that was all about postmortems, which have nothing to do with Chef. We had a show recently about console and console template, which if you've never heard of, it's cool. It's not Chef. If you know that, like, that's my proof that we don't always talk about Chef all the time. Yeah, so that's me. I'd like to know you, but before I know you, there's one other chef in the room. One of my coworkers is here who's going to help out today, so I'm going to let Sean say hello.
Hello.
That's Sean. That's all I'm going to let him say. He's not allowed to say anything else. You can say hi back. That was cool. Some of you waved. That was nice.
Yeah, I'm here because there's a lot of you, and if you need help, just kind of flail your arms around, and I'll come and help you.
Yes.
Except for the people behind the divider that I can't see. So,
that's right. There's this lovely divider. I'm just going to talk to the divider all day so that I don't offend either half of the room. I will do my best to move back and forth, and you know, we're just here to have some fun. There are enough of us in the room that I feel like if we went around the room and had everyone introduce themselves, it'd be time for lunch, and that would not really help us learn much Chef, although it would be cool to get to know one another. So here's what I'm going to propose. I'm going to do a couple of polls, a couple of quick questions, and you're going to raise your hands. Sometimes I call this science, because you know that's how science works. You ask people to raise their hand, and that's real data. So quick show of hands. How many of you consider yourselves system administrators? Okay, good. And developers? And then the special class of developer called Ruby developer. How many of you consider yourself Ruby developers? Okay. When I said special class, I hope I didn't offend. Like, that's cool. You can be a Ruby developer. It's not like awesome. How many of you use Chef today? Okay, so those of you that just put up your hand, let me tell you a little bit about this course. And everyone else can listen. This is totally going to be an intro-y course. So if you're cool with that, great, stick with us. If you decide at any point that you're not getting anything out of this class and you decide to get up and leave, we'll give you a refund. It was a free class, right? So you'll get your money back, you'll leave, and I won't be offended. If you want me to be offended, make sure you let me know. The reason that you're leaving is like because I'm an asshole. Hopefully that's not the reason that you're going to leave. Maybe it's because I curse, because sometimes I do that also. Cool, so some of you use Chef, and some of you are Ruby developers. I have a request of both of you. If I say something that you know to be false, please keep your mouth shut. It's cool. Like, sometimes I lie. I will correct my lies and like tell the truth later in the day. But if I say something that's false, that's between you and me. Is that cool? We all agree to that? Good stuff. So, awesome. What I'd like to do is spend 3 minutes. What I would ask that you do is introduce yourself to your neighbor, because although Sean and I are here to help you with the labs today, if you run into problems, the other people that are here to help you are those that are sitting next to you. So let's just take 3 minutes, introduce yourself to your neighbors, say whatever you like. So, go. Lots of noise. Vincent, nice to meet you. All right, very good. Enough talking. No more. So we all know each other now. That's great. The other question I forgot to ask in my quick poll was how many of you are on call right now? There are only a couple of sysadmins, but some of you developers might be on call also. All right. If your site goes down, if your shit blows up, fix that. Don't like feel like you should stay here and, oh my gosh, he's going to tell me the most important thing about a recipe in this next minute. My business is on fire, but it's cool. I'm going to learn about a recipe. Don't do that. Fix that thing. I'm not on call anymore, although I used to be. So when I became a community director, what I like to do, or what I say about that transition from running operations at a place to being a community director, I put down the pager and I picked up the bar tab. As it turns out, in either case, I'm still up until 2 in the morning. But it's a lot more fun to be a community director than it is to be woken up at 2 a.m. because your phone went off. But that said, I feel for people that are on call. So when I teach classes and when I give presentations at conferences, I always leave my phone on, the ringer turned up. So if you tweet at me during this class, my phone will blow up. So you can totally troll me throughout the class. I will ignore my phone. You'll watch it happen. And the people that were on my team when I used to run a production infrastructure will say that I learned that skill when I got paged then also. Like, just ignore your phone. It's cool. So I'd like to have some fun today. This is a free course. You've given up a day in December to come and sit and hang out here with a bunch of other folks from New York. How many of you are not from New York City? Wow, so we got to find out some quick, where did you come from? Where did you travel up from? Princeton. From Princeton? Baltimore. From Baltimore. All right, I came from Annapolis. So you in the back? From where? Philly? Okay.
Philly times 2.
Philly times 2. All right. Who else do we have that's not from New York? Yes?
North Jersey.
From North Jersey. All right, cool. So some of you, those of you that came up for free, if you're bored in the class and you leave because you want to go check out the city, I won't tell your boss. I promise. It's cool. Like, you can totally say, boss, I learned a lot of chef. It was awesome. And in fact, on the train back, you could just watch the video. So like, I don't want you to skip out on this class because we're going to have a lot of fun. But you know, if you have to, you have to. That's cool. So this is an introduction to Chef. We're going to do some fun stuff. We're going to have a lot of hands-on. This morning, though, at the very beginning, it's going to be a lot of me just talking and making sure that we all have sort of a level set understanding of what Chef is and what it does. I am not going to read you slides throughout the day, but I will put them up on the board as they're up here now. So we have some course objectives. These are some of the things that we will do over the course of today. One of the things that's kind of cool is we're going to verify our automation code before it runs in production. So I'm going to teach you a test-driven development workflow. How many of you have written code in a test-driven process like workflow before? It's cool. How many of you are scared to write tests? It's cool. You can say that because that's me also. Like, I understand, and we're going to make you less scared today. I won't claim that we'll completely erase that fear. It's cool. There's a thing about learning Chef. You guys are sysadmins or developers, so you understand your infrastructure. You understand your applications. The thing I don't understand is your infrastructure or applications. And the thing that you can't forget about as you start learning Chef is your infrastructure and applications. Like, Chef is a framework that will help you automate things. You can't automate what you don't understand. Actually, you can, as it turns out, but then you end up with really shitty automation, and that's not so good. How many have been in that position before? I have, yeah, for sure. Like, shitty automation that automates things I don't understand. Just means that I don't understand them and I can break them much, much faster. But you need to bring that knowledge with you as you're learning Chef. We're not going to learn everything about Chef today, but I'm going to get you started on the path towards learning Chef. Learning Chef itself is like learning a language. It's a framework. It is a language. The best way to learn it is to actually use it. So if what you do after today is go home and not use Chef for 3 months, when you sit down to use Chef again, you're going to hate yourself. You're going to hate me because you won't have remembered anything that I said, except for maybe some of my jokes. Otherwise, you won't remember anything I said, and that will be sad. So what you need to do is use Chef tomorrow. Tomorrow's Friday, so maybe you're working. You should totally use Chef tomorrow. If not, it can wait till Monday, maybe. But I wouldn't go much longer than that. Like, use it right away. This is totally, I want this class today to be a discussion. I know what every slide says, so it's not so fun for me to just flip through slides. It's more fun for me when you ask me questions. So as questions come to you, please ask them. And if I don't like your question, I'll put it on a parking lot over here, which means this is the list of things I'm never going to talk to you about. Actually, that's not what it means. It means we'll talk about these things at breaks or at the end of the day if there's time and so forth. And I'll totally answer every question that you have. And of course, we have Sean in the room also, so you have a couple of people that can help you out, and your neighbors can help you as well. It is just an introduction. There's lots of words on this slide. Yes, there's nothing new. You can follow along as we go. So as it turns out, I've already published these slides on the web, and you can go grab them right now. If you go to github.com/Nathan Harvey, and you have to misspell my name. So here's the funny name story about how I live. So in my family, the rule was mom picks the names and dad misspells them. So my father misspelled my name and all of my siblings' names. I'd like to say, and he'd probably like me to say also, that he had such foresight back in the day, back in the early 70s. He was like, yes, my children, when they grow up, they're going to need unique domain names. So I'm going to misspell all of their names, and it totally worked. So mine is Nathen, as opposed to An, Harvey. And then if you go to /chef-guilt-2014, you will find there a PDF of the slides that I'm currently walking you through, the full PowerPoint of the slides, another one that will help you set up Atom to do remote file text editing if you're interested in that because you're not comfortable with command line text editor. That's cool, and we can talk about that later. But we're also, as I mentioned, and some of you came in the room after I mentioned this, so I want to say it again. Full disclosure, this is being streamed live right now to YouTube. So just be aware of that. No one can see you, they can all hear you, unless you ask your question very quietly. But if you ask your question quietly, I'm going to repeat it, but they won't necessarily know it was you that asked, so that's cool. I have given you all of the slides, but with those slides comes a social contract that you are all about to agree to. Here's our social contract that we have in this classroom. It's kind of a broad social contract, so you have to listen. This is an important part to pay attention to. Number one, the most important part about our social contract today is that this room is a safe learning space. So there is no question that you can ask that is a bad question or a stupid question. If you don't understand something, it's my fault. And you need to ask the question so that you can call me out. Say, I don't understand what you're talking about. Let me know, and I will help you. And if I can't help you, or if it's not a good time, maybe Sean will help you. But we're going to help you learn as we go through the day. So that's part of our social contract. The other part of our social contract is I've just given you access to all of the slides, which includes access to all of the labs. So the thing you cannot do is work ahead on the labs. Actually, you can. I can't stop you from working ahead. But when you work ahead and get yourself dug into a hole that you can't escape from, I'm sorry, that's your fault now. So just stay with us. Don't try to work too far ahead. That's pretty much the entirety of our social contract. Can we all agree to that? I just need head nods from everybody. It's like sitting in the exit row. I need you to look at me and give me a verbal yes. I'm going to go around. No, I'm not actually going to do that. Yes, there's a question already. That's great. Yes. There is a link that you can share. I tweeted the link, so you can follow me on Twitter. I told you you could troll me on my phone by tweeting at me, but I didn't tell you my Twitter handle. It's my name, so it's Nathan Harvey. So if you go to Twitter/NATHENHARVEY, the last tweet should say something like, I'm teaching a class. Here's a link to a YouTube video stream. And you can grab that there. And if you tweet at me, my phone will make noises. I think. I better make sure that that's the case. The problem when I do that is my coworkers also like to troll me while I teach classes. It is totally true. The last time I did this, someone decided to see if I would ignore a phone call also, so they called me in the middle of class. I ignored his phone call, so it might happen today. What other questions can I answer before we move on? All right. So remember, when those questions come to you, just ask them. So here's a quick insight into our agenda. These are some of the things that we're going to do. I'm going to start this morning with an overview of Chef, just to make sure that we all kind of have a level set understanding of what Chef is all about, what problems it attempts to solve, and so forth. And then we're going to dig right into using Chef. So as soon as we get through the overview of Chef, the very next section on resources, you will start typing and you will start using Chef immediately. And we're going to use Chef throughout the day. So we'll talk about resources, policies, testing, verifying your node state, and so forth. At the end of the day, we'll do a little wrap up where we talk about a bunch of other topics. And if there's time, I will answer any question that you have. And that's kind of a lie, not if there's time. You can ask me any question at any time, and I'll answer that question. Preferably a question about Chef. Although I just lied to you, and I lie to you a lot, and usually I'll tell you when I lied to you. I said I would answer any question. I'll answer any question that I feel confident that I know the answer to. If you ask me a question and I'm not sure what it is, I will not stand up here and bullshit you. I will tell you I don't know what the answer to that question is. So I hope that's okay with you. We're going to take breaks as often as we need them. And here's the thing also about our social contract. We're all adults in this room, so if you need a break, get up and take a break. It's cool. No one's going to judge you for that. We'll break for lunch, and Gilt is awesome. They give us free training, and they bring in lunch for us also. So, and a little breakfast. So it's kind of nice, kind of a sweet deal. So hopefully you've completed the prerequisites by now. And really the two prerequisites that are absolutely required is that you have an SSH client so you can make a connection to our workstations later, and that either you're comfortable with a command line text editor like VI, Nano, or Emacs, or you have another good text editor like Atom installed locally, and then we can talk about how to edit remote files with Atom. Yes, I already said all of that. All right, so now let's talk about Chef. What is Chef? Some of you use Chef. You're gonna have a problem. Yeah. Yeah, so that it's cool. Like some of the tables have plugs in them, but then if you look underneath the table, the cord just goes to the nowhere. So it feels like you plugged in your computer, but you didn't. So if you find yourself in that state, borrow power from someone else or move. Cool. Overview of Chef. So Chef is a platform for automation. Is it warm in this room or is it just me? It's warm in this room. All right. Maybe we can do something about that. Is there a thing here?
There's one like that.
I see it.
All right. I've got a trusty assistant who is going to lower the temperature in here for us.
Try that.
Thanks. We'll see how that goes. And we all know how well thermostats in like large office buildings usually work, right? Yeah. So it might stay warm. It's cool. We'll just, if you fall asleep, I'm going to throw something at you. All right. That's the other part of our social contract. That was the unwritten part of our social contract. So that's the thing. So why do you want to automate? You want to automate your infrastructure, the deployment of your applications. When you do so, you receive a number of benefits. You receive benefits like speed, consistency, and scale. I am not going to spend a whole lot of time dissecting this sort of theoretical stuff, but I do want questions if you have them. I'm going to make an assumption that all of us watched the little 40-minute intro to Chef that I recommended in the prerequisites, which helps this section go a little bit faster. One thing, though, that I do want to talk about is scale. When we talk about scale, it's very easy and obvious for people to think about the number of servers that you have. That is the one thing that determines scale. If I have 100,000 servers, I'm working at scale. But scale can come in a number of different flavors or works across a number of different dimensions. Sure, it's the number of servers that you have in your infrastructure, but it's also the size of your team. If you have one person on your team, it's a completely different story than if you have 100 people on your team that are managing that infrastructure. So scale can happen at the people level as well. There's also just the speed at which you want to deliver new infrastructure, new application. That can determine, like, that's a dimension of scale. And then also complexity. If you have 100,000 servers and they all have one job and they're all identical, it's probably not actually like huge scale. It's 100,000 of the same thing. Whereas if you have 50 servers and they're running 200 different applications, like that's, in my mind, that's a bigger scale than the 100,000 machines that do exactly the same thing. So just something to think about. So what you need to help you with this scale is an automation platform. The automation platform that you use should be awesome. That's what Chef is. It's awesome. There are other automation platforms out there. They're also awesome because they help you do your job a lot better than you did it before you had an automation platform. There are a bunch of attributes that any automation platform, any good automation platform should have. There's a list of them here. I'm not going to read this list, and I'm not going to go into the details of it. But if you have questions, you know what to do. Yes?
I had a question about
Sure.
this with the first bullet. So when I went through the tutorial,
Yeah.
is there a topology visualization component?
Yeah, so the question was, Chef, it says here, creates a dependable view of your entire network state. And the question was, well, view, and I went through the tutorials, is there actually a view that I can look at, like a graphical representation of what my infrastructure looks like? And the answer is no. Chef does not provide that for you today. Chef does provide you a view in that it understands the state of your infrastructure. Like if you were my infrastructure, it would know that like this section of the room are my application servers. That section of the room back there are my database servers. That said, all that data is there. So if you want to build a view, and there are certainly customers of ours, and by customers, what I mean is people that use Chef that have built things along those lines. Yeah. Awesome. Yes?
I apologize.
Do not apologize. Like, that's the other thing. If you have a question, you're not allowed to apologize for a question. It's okay.
The live streaming.
Yes.
A friend of mine who watches it said that the camera is pointing to the wall instead of the screen, and actually check.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's probably pointing at me now. Hi, sorry, let me fix the live stream.
It's looking at that wall.
It's looking at which wall?
That wall.
That wall. That's weird. How is it doing that? That doesn't make any sense to me. Also, let's see. There should just be a micro. All right. Oh, yeah. It looks like I'm not screen sharing. I want to share that. Do that. And then I want to go back. Look at that. Isn't that fun? Hey, look at that. We can go on forever. To infinity and beyond in chef training. Can anyone verify that it's now sharing my screen?
It's sharing you.
It's still sharing me?
Yeah.
Really? Yeah, give it a second to catch up. That's the thing about a live stream. The live part is a lie. It's not, it takes a couple of, I don't know, a little bit. I'm going to assume that it's going to correct. And after I get through the next slide, you just throw something at me if it hasn't. Or when it does, like give me a thumbs up or something.
Okay, will do.
That's awesome. And certainly don't apologize because you just fixed the recording for everyone that wants to watch this later, which is a good thing. Yeah. Everyone thank her. What's your name?
Tanya.
Tanya. Thank you, Tanya. Everyone, let's hear it. Ready? All right, and it's fixed. Awesome. Great. Yes. Sure.
So, kind of related to what we asked.
Yes.
Is there a value in, to visualize that? You could do that in Nagios or, other platforms, right?
Sure.
It tells you what's really live and
Uh-huh.
what is down, along with any other monitoring system. So what's the value in doing Chef itself, that type of view, what my topology is?
So what's the value in if Nagios can tell me like what my topology looks like? Who cares if Chef can tell me about it also? Like there are other tools that can tell me about that. Why does Chef care? So the reason that Chef cares is Chef is infrastructure as code, right? And a very simple example that you use, maybe you write a web application and your application needs to talk to a database, right? And so when you're building out the configuration for your application, you need to tell your application which database server to talk to. Well, with Chef, you don't have to know in advance the host name or the IP address of what that database server is going to be. The application server can ask the Chef server, who's the database server that I should talk to? And it will tell you this is the database server you should talk to. So by having that view of your topology, you don't need to know that stuff in advance. And also as things change over time, because things will change, right? Chef can keep your infrastructure in a valid state. Another easy example to think about is a load balancer. So a load balancer is going to send traffic back to a number of web servers. What is that number of web servers and which web servers are there? And what about this new one that we just added? How do I change the load balancer configuration? Because Chef has that data about your infrastructure, the load balancer can stay up to date based on the topology of your network, based on the results that it's from the Chef server. Does that help? Yeah, great, great, awesome. Okay, I said Chef is infrastructure as code. That's a loaded term for me, infrastructure as code. It has some very specific meanings in my mind, and I want to talk about a couple of those. So number one, it means you can programmatically provision and configure components within your infrastructure. So we're going to write code that will describe the desired state of our infrastructure. That code will be executed within our infrastructure, and our infrastructure will meet our desired state. So it will become the infrastructure that we always wanted it to be. It also means when we say infrastructure as code that you will treat your infrastructure or your infrastructure code like any other code base. Now, when I say you treat it like any other code base, what are some things that I might be implying there when I say treat it like any other code base? What do you do with other code bases? It's versioned. It's in version control. Absolutely. So the very first thing that you should understand about managing your infrastructure as code is that it will be in a version control system. How many of you use copy foo to foo.back as your version control system? You have to. You had to. Yes, you've done that before. Like we've all done that before. That is not a version control system. Even if you, instead of back, use the date, it's still not a version control system, right? You have to use a proper version control system. So which version control systems do you use? Git? Anyone use something other than Git? SVN? Do you use the Git SVN plugin? If not, you should. What was the other one that I heard? GFS? TFS? Okay. I don't know what to say. Like that's cool. If it works for you, you should use TFS. That's fine. Yeah, I know what it is. So I might be biased, but any proper version, when I say proper version control system, I mean use whatever version control system you want. It's true. As long as it starts with GIT, you're in good shape. That's right. So yes, you can use Subversion. Just use the Git SVN plugin and you'll be super happy. Or yes. And then convince all of your colleagues what we should do is move to Git.
Use a bit of both.
Yeah, you use a bit of both. All right, that's totally cool also. But maybe you should only use Git. I don't know. But like the truth of and the heart of the matter here is if you're not using a proper version control system for everything, what you should do today is not learn Chef. You should learn Git. Because you have to use proper version control system for everything that you do. It doesn't make sense to start writing automation code if you're not versioning it properly. All right, I will step down off of that sandbox, at least for a moment, about version control systems. It's cool. What else does it mean when I say you treat it like any other code base? Like, you got one of the points, right? Yes.
Keep your secrets out of it.
Keep your secrets out of it. Oh, that's a good one that no one, you're the first person every time I teach this class that's ever said that. So if you have a database password or an SSH key or something like an API key or something that is sensitive, what you probably shouldn't do is put that into your source code repository. Because now it might be exposed to more people than you want. So that's definitely a concern.
Can you talk a bit now or later about how to
manage that within Chef? Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to write that on the board. And what I'm actually going to do is ask my trusty assistant, Sean, if he would write like keeping secrets on the board. It's awesome to have a Sean in the room. You should all get a Sean for your room. I love you, Sean. I don't know. Put it where, oh, actually, there's a flip chart over here. You could write it on the flip chart even. It's best if you have a Sean who knows what to do when you say write something on the board, but you know, we can help him through it. So cool, yes, we should keep our secrets out of our version control system. What else does it mean when you test, absolutely, right? So when you write code, when you write your application code, hopefully your application developers, hopefully either you are an application developer or you work with application developers, as you're writing code, you're also writing tests for that code. And you should do the same thing with your infrastructure code. Just because it's infrastructure code doesn't mean it should be treated like a second-class citizen. You should be writing tests for that all the time also. Anything else about a code base?
Peer review.
Peer review, absolutely. So when you write code, you should show it to someone else. It's super cool to have an automation framework like Chef because you can write a change to your configuration and that change goes out across your entire infrastructure immediately. And it's super terrible to have an automation framework like Chef because you can write a change and that change will go out across your entire infrastructure automatically, right? It's only terrible when you wrote bad code, right? Something like you brought down your entire application because of this one thing that you wrote. So you want ways to prevent that from happening. Peer review is a great way to prevent that from happening. Testing, which we already talked about, is another great way to prevent that from happening. Yeah. Anything else about code? Yes?
Standardized and clean.
It should be standardized and clean, right? So you should have maybe a style guide for the code that you write. And it should be something that you agree upon within your team, at least. And sometimes when you write code with open source frameworks like Chef, there's a larger community of people that use Chef, and you might use some of their code. So understanding what like idiomatic code looks like in that community is probably a good thing for you. And when I say idiomatic, that's kind of a big word that I didn't really understand for a while. And so I'm not going to assume that you don't know what it means, but I'm going to tell you, like, I used to think it meant idiotic code. Like, why would I write that? That's kind of stupid. What it means is like following the best practices. Like, this is the way that you should write the code. Cool. Anything else about what it means to be a code base? There's one other thing that's super important.
Release mechanism.
You should have some release mechanisms. Yeah, so you should maybe version that code, not just in a version control system, but also like, here's an artifact of that code that has a honing our craft and getting better and better at writing code. So code is a continual experiment. And just because it's now infrastructure code, that doesn't change the fact that that code is a continual experiment. Cool. So we're going to treat our code, our infrastructure like any other code base. And now also, with infrastructure as code, we can reconstruct our business with three things. We need a source code repository that has all of our code in it. We need a backup of our data, and we need compute resources. That's all we need to rebuild our applications. So because we're managing our applications in the same way that we're managing our infrastructure, we have true portability. So if you're on Amazon today and you want to move from one region of Amazon to another, you can do so. If you want to move from Amazon to some other cloud-based provider, you can do so. All of your code is there, so you can go and spawn that infrastructure somewhere else. If you're at a data center today and want to move to the cloud, Chef can help you do that because you've captured everything in code. So I'm going to tell you a little story about how I became a sysadmin. So I had worked in the software industry for a long time, had many varying roles. I was at this huge German company, huge German software company. It's a very large German software company whose initials are not SAP. But it's the second largest German software company, if it doesn't matter who it was. I was tired of working there. I wanted to get out of that. And I wanted to go do something different. I want you to be a reference. He said, that's cool, except. And I thought, oh, I don't know what this except is going to be. He said, well, I just started a startup, and I want you to come here and interview because I want right of first refusal. I'm like, oh, okay, that sounds kind of cool. I've been in this huge software company, and I can get into a startup. That sounds like a fun thing to do. And so I went and I interviewed, and I got hired as the director of customer support. Here's the thing. That startup was a stealth startup. So guess what a stealth startup doesn't have? Customers, right? They don't even have a product. But I was hired as the director of customer support. It was brilliant, actually. I was super happy. I'm like, I'm in the startup scene now. I'm getting paid a good salary, and I'm the director of customer support, and there are no customers. Like, I was on the top of the world. It was so super awesome. But as it turned out, like 3 days after I started, the CEO came into my office. And of course, it was the startup scene, right? So when I say he came into my office, he was sitting at this desk, and he walked over here. And he was like, hey, Nathan, those Russian developers that built the prototype that got us the funding that allowed us to hire a director of customer support. I said, yeah, I know those guys. They're kind of cool. He said, no, they're not. We fucking hate them. We just fired them. So here's the thing. You're now the most technical person on staff. So what I need you to do, first and foremost, is kick them out of our email servers because I don't want them taking the code that they wrote with them. I said, well, boss, they have this thing called Subversion where they put all of their code in, so it doesn't really matter if they have email or not. They can still get the code. He said to me, stop talking about them being subversive. I know they are. That's why we fired them. What I want you to do is get them out of email. I said, okay, I've never managed an email server before, but it's cool. I'll sort it out. I'll kick them out of our email. That's fine. And then, like, he saw the other, like I had this nervous look on my face. He's like, don't worry. You don't have to take the prototype that they built and turn it into a real application that we can open up to customers. We've hired in a firm to do that for us, like to take it to the last mile. Like, oh, thank goodness. Like, I was really nervous that I was going to have to write all the code now also. He said, no. But we are going live in 6 weeks. I need you to build us a production infrastructure onto which we can deploy said code, said application. So that day, I became a full-fledged system administrator and learned my craft that day. And I have to tell you also that I was the best sysadmin there ever was back then, and I'll tell you why. I would log into a box that was off somewhere. Like, I could never touch it because infrastructure as a service is a thing. It's kind of a beautiful thing. But I would log into this box, and I would want to install Apache or something. But I would be super nervous about it because I'm sitting at the command line and like, this isn't a thing I've done before. Should I compile it? Should I trust a package? Like, honestly, those were questions that I asked. Should I compile it myself or should I trust the package that comes from the distribution? And the answer that I gave was I should not trust anyone else's package. I should totally compile it myself. See how smart of a sysadmin I was? But then I was nervous because I'm like, oh man, I'm going to compile this thing and what's going to happen? Is it going to work? I don't know. So I would type in the command, and before I hit the magic button, we all know what the magic button is, right? It's enter or return that makes the command happen. I would take that command and I would copy it and I would paste it into a wiki so that when I needed to do it again, I would know how to do it. And it was brilliant because I saved this command so then I could repeat it later. I had such confidence in my infrastructure. So I would save that thing and then the thing would work and I would be super pumped. And then I have to go and do it again, and I would just go to the wiki, and I would just repeat all of the steps that were there, and I would copy them and paste them into the next terminal window. But the thing that I didn't realize until it was too late was the minute I hit save on that wiki, it became a lie. it became the obituary of what my infrastructure used to look like, but doesn't look like anymore, because as it turns out, like I would log in and change things and I wouldn't copy and paste them into the wiki. So every day I shot myself in the foot again and dug myself deeper and deeper into a hole. A buddy of mine came to me and said, hey, you know, you're getting pretty good at this sysadmin thing. I've heard about this tool. It's called, well, there are a couple of tools out there, actually. There's one called Puppet. There's one called Chef. And what they do is they help you automate all of that stuff that you're doing. I said, that's cool, but man, I'm so fucking busy. I don't have time to automate. I need to keep working this way, which were true words that came out of my mouth. I don't have time to automate, right? How many of you have felt or said that before? Yeah, it's cool. You don't have to lie. It's like we've all been there. But as it turns out, like when you do, wow, you hate yourself from like 3 minutes ago, the person that said that, now that I've automated one thing. So that's how I came to become a system administrator. One day, I was in the shower in the morning, and I realized, like, now I'm using Chef. I'm using this framework to automate my infrastructure. The next change I make in production is going to start with a commit to my Git repository. Like that day, I became a free man. I was so happy. I like understood what my infrastructure. I'm getting chills telling the story right now because it was like it's so it moved me so much. Like, wow. So that's what infrastructure as code is, and that's what we're going to teach you some of today. That's my little story. So today will be filled with lies, stories from Nathan, maybe stories from you, and also some learning Chef. So Chef is policy-based. What does that mean? It means that you capture the policy for your infrastructure in code. And what is a policy? A policy is the desired state, the way and the shape that you want your infrastructure to look like. Now I'm using very high-level terms here like policy and like the infrastructure should be in some shape. We're going to talk about the specifics of exactly what that means. But Chef will ensure that each node or each component within your infrastructure is in line with that policy or meets that desired state. Chef itself provides to you a DSL or a domain-specific language that allows you to describe the policy of infrastructure. So Chef understands what infrastructure, like what it means to talk about infrastructure. It understands what a package is. It understands what a service is and has components within the DSL that allow you to describe those things. And we're going to look at how do we actually write those things. All right, that's it. That's it for like the intro, the overview of Chef stuff. And as promised in the resources section, we're going to start writing code. So what I'd like to do, it's like 6 minutes till 10. Let's take like a 5 or 6 minute break. So 10 o'clock, we'll get started again. I'm going to pass out some cards. We're not going to do magic tricks, but everyone needs to have a playing card. So at 10 o'clock, between now and 10 o'clock, you should get up out of your seat. You should go do something that's not this. And then you should get back to your seat and make sure you have a playing card.
Can we do that?
Can we do magic tricks? Chef is going to make us do magic tricks. Watch. Look, and I just did a magic trick there. I dumped the cards on the floor. It was awesome. All right, move. All right, a card. Pick a card, any card. Every card is equal. It doesn't matter which card you take. All right, take the last one. There you go. Grab it. Grab a card. Here. That's cool. That's cool. This is how I'm gonna pick on people, right? Here. Card. A raffle. Yeah, it's for a raffle. Here. Card. Yeah. Great. Yeah, Sean gets a card too. Everybody gets a card.
So if I wanted to step here, the closest plug is like one of my core TV. It's kind of hard to hear.
It's kind of hard to hear.
A little bit. It's just like,
And you just raise your hand. And I'll ignore you and expect you're not asking a question. I'll just talk louder.
okay, gotcha.
And then if you have a question, raise both hands, and then I'll know. Is that cool?
Yeah.
No, it's not. That's terrible.
We have to do a wave. This is question. Just be louder.
Sure. We'll have like a whole series of hand signals that only you and I understand.
Just take one.
Mhm.
This is about like seconds away from every single episode. Same 5, 6, 7, Amazon, Zeus, 7, 1, 2, 10, 12, 15, I listen to the right.
Seeing as you're from Annapolis,
Yes.
how come the closest you can get from Baltimore is like Philly for the classes?
We do them in DC.
I think, okay, you don't have any schedule.
We don't have any scheduled right now. That's true. That's true.
Because, I mean, I think I can condense my classes into the advanced
Oh, yeah.
after this. I mean, we've been playing around with it in a production environment for a little while. So,
Where do you work?
Hopkins.
Oh, it happened.
Yeah, I work in the library system.
Oh, yeah. Great. Great.
So, trying to work our way through it.
Yeah.
Really terrible infrastructure.
Mention IP addresses.
They are.
Guarantee this one's on once.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, grab another one.
Figured I'd just.
Yeah. Cool. I don't know why it's not on the list. Sure.
There's another guy that's going to have another 3.
All right, I'm gonna refill my coffee and then we're gonna go again. Make sure you have a card. If you don't have a card, grab one from up here, or yeah, just grab one from up here. All right, it feels like it's cooled off a little bit in here. Awesome. Now, if you start getting cold, the thing I'm going to tell you is work harder. Learn harder. So then you'll warm up, because that'll help. All right, does everybody have a card? Anyone need a card? Need a card. All right. Absolutely. And we'll talk about what these cards are for in a minute. Some of you have already sorted out what the cards are for. If you haven't, it's cool. I'm going to tell you. So let's talk about resources. So with Chef, what we're going to do is describe the state of our infrastructure, describe what we want our machines to look like within our infrastructure. And we're going to use the Chef language to do so, or the Chef framework to do so. And the fundamental building block that we have within that Chef language is a resource. So a resource, when you think about your systems, a resource is a piece of the system and its desired state. So what does that actually mean? It might mean a package that should be installed. So here's an example of a resource. This is what it looks like in Chef world, in the Chef language. I have a package called MySQL Server. Its state, its desired state, is that it should be installed. So it has this keyword, action install. So the package that should be installed, there may be a service that should be running. These are the resources that we have within Chef. A file that should be generated. A cron job that should be executing. Think about your infrastructure. Think about the various bits and pieces of your infrastructure, the things that you want to change, or the things that you want to manage in your infrastructure. Each one of these is a resource within Chef. It might be a user that should be managed on your systems. It might be a DSC resource. How many of you are Windows users? And do you use DSC? Yeah, so DSC is pretty awesome. You can manage your DSC resources directly from Chef as well. It should be a registry key that should be managed. So you can manage your registry keys with Chef. So it's a piece of the system and its desired state. Is that a question? Yes.
Can you do WMI modifications?
Yes. Yep. So Chef comes with a bunch of built-in resources. And you can find them all on the docs site. So if you go to docs.chef.io, you'll find a resources link, or you can go to that full URL and it will show you a list of all of the resources that are available with Chef. The cool thing about Chef, or one of the cool things about Chef, is you can also define your own custom resources. So if you look at the list of resources that Chef provides and think, you know, that's not really, there's this other thing that I need to manage, you can write your own resource that will manage that for you. Today, we will not write any of our own resources. That's it's certainly more than an introductory topic for us, but it's totally available. So we're going to do our first lab, and all of our labs are going to be set up kind of like this. I'm going to give you a problem, and I'm going to give you a success criteria. So our problem in this case is that our workstation doesn't have an editor. And actually, before that, we have another problem. You don't have a workstation. But that's what the card is for, and I'll describe that in just a second. So we're going to do a little lab where we install a text editor on that workstation. As it turns out, VI is there, but nobody uses VI. If you use VI, you actually use Vim, right? Because Vim is better than VI, although it takes longer to type. But it's only one character, so it's cool. You get so much more power out of Vim than VI. So we want to install we want to install Vim, or Emacs, or Nano on our workstation. We're going to walk through how to do that with Chef. So the first thing you need to do is log into your lab machine. And actually, we're going to pause here. We're going to break from the slides for a second because there's a couple of things that you need to do. What I'd like you to do right now is go to a web browser. And we're going to go to github.com/NathanHarvey/ whatever this class is called. I don't remember anymore. I don't know where I am. Chef Guilt 2014. Yeah. So so go to this URL. Can everybody see that URL, or raise your hand if you need help getting here? I need to make sure everybody's here. I know you can't read that URL from where you're sitting, right? You're like, that was a ridiculous question, Nathan. Why would you ask me if I can read that URL? Of course I can't. So let me just do this. Can you read that URL? Yes? So what you should do is go there. Once you're there, there's a README. And if you scroll down through the README, there's going to be a section here. I know I put it in here. Right here. It's called Student Workstations. And it says IP addresses for each student can be found in this gist. So click on the words this gist. And this is where your card comes in. So your card has 3 important things about it. It has a color, which is the back side of your card. It's either going to be red or blue. And then it has a suit and a number. And you know which your suit and number is. And so what I want you to do is scroll down in that list, and you will find an IP address there. And it should match your card. And if you have a card that does not have an IP address, you should get another card. Did I give you a bad card?
Give me a bad card, man.
Awesome. Sometimes I give out bad cards. This is how I know who my trouble students are, right? If you took the wrong card, it's totally not my fault. It's definitely yours. Okay, so once you've found that, the thing that you need to do is log into that machine. And we're going to log in via SSH. So you should launch your SSH client, and you're going to SSH into that machine. The username that you're going to use is chef. And the password you're going to use, I'm not going to say. The reason I'm not going to say this is we are streaming this live on the internet, and I just gave everyone on the internet all of your IP addresses. And so if I tell you out loud what the password is, then everybody can log into your box and fuck with you. And we don't want people to do that. So I'm going to write it down on both sides of the room. I would put it on my screen, but you know, same problem there. So here's your password. It's super secure and super hard. Sean's going to write it over there. Everybody got that? So I'm going to do the same here. So I'm in a terminal window here. Hopefully that's large enough for everyone to see. And I'm going to log into my machine. So this IP address coincides with my card. I'm going to do SSH chef at my IP address, and then I'm going to hit enter. And then it's going to do a thing. Did it do a thing for you? Other than just sit here and wait emptily? All right, good. So what did it do when you did that? It gave you a shell. It did something before that, I bet. Yeah, it asked you about your RSA signature. So you have to validate the RSA key for that particular machine. Did you all do that? Do you know how to do that? How do you do that? You type the word Y-E-S, or the letters Y-E-S, and then you hit the magic key. And if you're using PuTTY or something like that, it'll throw up a little warning box that says, hey, do you want to validate this RSA key? And the way that you validate it is you hit the OK button or the continue button or the whatever button that is in PuTTY. And mine seems to not be working. I must have picked a bad card or something. So I'm going to cancel that. I'm going to cancel that, and I'm going to do this. So I already updated my, well, that didn't work right. I need 2 hands to type. Here I already did my password, or validated my RSA key. So my machine is slightly different than yours, but only slightly different. You need a new card back there? All right, now this is probably the most important lab that we do right now, and it is not in the slides anywhere. So if you've worked ahead, you've already skipped one lab on us, so shame on you. You've logged into your machine. This is what I need you to do. I want you to type the word touch, T-O-U-C-H, and then I want you to type in your full name. And then with no spaces, and then I want you to hit the enter key. What's that? I would like you to be in your home directory, which should be /home/chef. You should log in and touch yourself. Wow, that didn't sound good. That did not sound right, did it? So what you should do is touch a file that has your name. Has everyone done this? All right, what I would like you to do next is type the command ls and then hit enter. You will not see the same thing that I see here, because I did a couple of things to this box already. But what you should see is your name. And the only name you should see is your name. If you see someone else's name, what we need to do is make sure that you both get a new card. You have 2 cards and neither one of them are working for you. Oh man, this is ridiculous. Here, you need a card?
No, I can, if you're gonna get out, I can just take this one.
Oh, I see. You guys are on the same thing. Yeah, just get rid of that one and just use the other one.
When do I get a new card?
New card, new card. There we go. All right. Anyone else need a new card? Anyone else? Everybody's good. So the other thing that's part of our social contract, I keep coming back to this social contract that's not written down anywhere. You now know the IP address of everyone else in this class and their login and password. You are going to stay out of any machine that is not yours. All right? There were too many devious laughs going on in the class. I don't really care for that.
See, we weren't thinking it before. Now there's.
Pull down the disk, edit it. Someone will still fuck with your machine. But what you could do is you could change Chef's password. You can remove that file using the rm command if you like. But like the most important thing, right now you've logged into the machine and you've verified that you're the only one on your machine. And I'll tell you a little bit about this machine in a second. What's that?
W command.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone need help getting into their box? All right, this machine that I've given you is going to be your workstation for the remainder of today. And what it is, it's a basic CentOS install. I've already installed on it, though, the Chef DK, the Chef Development Kit. I've also clearly created a Chef user. I've allowed password login over SSH, which you should never do. How should you log into boxes using SSH? With your public key, yeah, with key, absolutely. But I don't want to also, like, distributing a public key would be just as insecure as distributing a password, right? But maybe a little bit more hard to deal with. So, so yeah, we have these completely insecure boxes. These boxes will disappear, not at the end of the day, probably on my train ride home tomorrow evening, they will disappear. So on this box, I've installed Chef DK. I've installed some other things. I'll tell you about them as we start to use them. And obviously, I've set up a Chef user for you. But everyone's on this box now. Everyone's logged in. So here's our problem. Let's go back to our lab here, our problem and our success criteria. Let's see. Oh, yeah. See, I put that on there. OK. So good. Our problem, your favorite editor is not installed. So if you like Vim, type which Vim right now, and you'll see that Vim is not installed there. If you prefer Emacs, type which Emacs, and you'll see that it's not there. If you prefer Nano, type which Nano, and you'll see that it's not there. If you hate all 3 of those and really don't want to use those today, it's cool. Let us know, and we will help you use something else. And by something else, I mean the Atom text editor, and we'll set up remote sync. And it's kind of complex, but we'll do that for you. All right, so is your favorite text editor there right now? It's not, so that's bad. So we want to fix that. We're going to fix that with Chef, of course. You could just install it yourself because you know how to install it yourself because you're a system administrator or a developer. How might you install this? I've told you this is a CentOS box. Yeah, you might yum install. Yes, yeah, you might yum install Emacs, right? Oh, the other thing about this, so I said Chef DK is installed. If you do a Chef -- version, you'll see that that's the case. I've also given you passwordless sudo access. So you can do sudo cat etc shadow, and you'll see that thing. You don't have to do those things. That will just validate that you have passwordless sudo access on this machine. Okay.
You mentioned Atom before?
Yes, I did mention Atom before.
Slides or?
It's not on the slides at all.
Because I've already noticed that a couple people.
All right.
I installed Atom.
You installed Atom. All right. Here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna pause for like 10 minutes. If If Vim or Emacs or Nano is your jam, cool. Use those. If it's not, it's just as cool. No one thinks less of you because this is a safe space. So we might think less of you when we leave the classroom, but it's cool. We actually don't think less of you. What I need you to do is have Atom installed, the Atom text editor. If you have that installed locally, I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes showing you how to get Atom hooked up to that workstation so that you don't have to use the text editor on that workstation at all. You can just edit files locally in Atom, and then they will automatically be synced up there. If that is not you, if you're like, no, I want to use Emacs today, and I'm comfortable with that, that's cool. Guess what you just earned? A 10-minute break. Those of you that want to use Atom, again, totally cool, but let's talk about how you're going to do that. And I'm going to walk you through that. I actually do have slides there that will walk you through that. Maybe you've already seen the slides if you went to that Git repository or that repository on GitHub. So let's just open that up really quick here. Yep. That's this one. What's that?
So syntax highlighting goes a long way.
Yeah, like having Atom actually will do syntax highlighting for you without having to like trick out your text editor. So if you have Atom and want to know how to like do remote files from Atom, even if Vim or Emacs is your jam, you can still stick around. You don't have to take a break. You can get Atom set up like this. So to edit your remote files, I have a lot of words around like, yes, Vim and Emacs are cool, but maybe Vim and Emacs are not for you. And this is definitely not a class where I want to teach you how to use Vim or Emacs. So if you're not like super comfortable there, don't use those. Use this method. Install Atom. Hopefully you have Atom already there. You could like SCP your files back and forth, but that you're going to forget to do that, and then things aren't going to work. So that's painful and ugly. And some graphical editors already have capabilities or plugins that will allow you to do this. Sublime Text has something similar, although I didn't build slides to show you the walkthrough on how to do that here. So we want to edit files remotely from our current workstation. So if you have Atom installed, go to your preferences. And if you're on a Mac, it's like you hit the command comma, and it will open up preferences for you in Atom. There's a packages section on the left-hand side, so click on packages, and then you can search for the package called Remote Sync. You search for that, you should then install that. And I'm going to pause here because, like I've shown you a screenshot, but, and told you how to do it on a Mac. But if you're not on a Mac, then I basically said, fuck you. And I didn't mean to say that, but I did. So I want to help you get to this point. So install Remote Sync. Raise your hand if you need help. All right, it's totally cool. Like, Sean, can you help?
Yep. I'm doing it software, so I have to do it.
So let's go to, oh, Adam's a text editor. Settings. You don't need it. It does. There we go. So it's Sublime. It's basically an open source version here.
No H.
So Remote Sync is a way of editing to wherever it is. Or maybe Sublime doesn't have it.
Yes, I stand here, the variation of this class.
Yes.
Trust me, like, editing files over PuTTY.
Haven't installed that.
Yeah,
I go to Atom.io.
So I think that's a.
Okay, so if you're on Windows, it's not preferences that you'll go to, it's settings that you'll go to and install the Remote Sync plugin. Yes? I'm sorry? There is a plugin for Sublime. I don't remember the name of it. So, again, I say fuck you. I don't really mean that, but sometimes that's what I say. It's not the literal words that I say until I tell you. I didn't actually say, but that's just it's fine. Okay, everyone who wants, have Remote Sync installed. Anyone need me to pause still? Okay, cool. We'll wait another minute here. If you've already installed it, you can open up its README and look at it and maybe sort out what you're going to do. But you don't have to do that. I'm going to tell you exactly what to do. But while you wait, if you want to check that out. And I'll talk about what Remote Sync is going to do for us. Remote Sync is going to, we're going to set up an SCP or secure copy connection to that workstation. And then we're going to synchronize the directory down to our local laptop, down to our local workstation. And we're also going to configure Atom so that when I save a file locally, it will automatically SCP that file back up to the workstation. So it's cool when you save the file in Atom on your desktop or on your laptop, the file on the workstation will be updated almost instantaneously, as long as it just has to do the SCP. But it will do that SCP in the background for you every time you save the file, which is kind of nice. Also nice, like even if you like Vim or Emacs, this is kind of a cool thing to know about. All right, I'm going to move on. So here's what you're going to do. We want to, now that we have Remote Sync installed, we need to configure it. So to get to the configuration, you have to go to like I forget what this thing is called, the palette here in Atom. So what you need to do is on Windows, press Control-Shift-P. And it will open up a little thing that will allow you to search through a bunch of settings. I want you to type remote, and it will find Remote Sync Configure. So click on Remote Sync Configure. If you're on a Mac, you won't click Control-Shift-P, you'll click Command-Shift-P, and that will open up this palette and search for Remote and select Remote Sync Configure. And that's going to open up a window that looks like this for you.
I think you need to be in a directory. Yeah.
So on my computer, I have. But I mean, I like Sublime. We got it.
I've never used one before.
Oh, I found a link to download that plugin, but I'm just going to use that.
Okay. All right, I'm holding on. I'm going to answer another question. Yes. Yep, that's it. Okay, I believe you.
configuration can only be done if you have Atom opens in a directory, not just like anonymous.
Oh, it can only be done if you have Atom open in a directory. Interesting. All right, so here's a little tip. So this is the first time I've done this that I just learned. If you have Atom open on just a file and you try to set up remote sync, will not work. But if you open up a folder in Atom, so even if it's an empty folder, so like create a folder where you want to store all of your stuff from today. I don't know, maybe call it Chef. And then you open up that folder in Atom. Even though that folder is empty, you can now configure remote sync. And that's probably why it didn't work for you. It's definitely why it didn't work for you in the back. So awesome. Thanks for the tip. Does that help, Sean?
I don't know yet.
All right. Definitely not there. All right, let's get you there. Oh, no. So have you installed the remote sync?
Yeah.
What's the mission?
Yeah, just right.
So let's do it.
No, there's not. Type your password. Very clear text.
So you're gonna essentially.
It's like,
If you take
So I'll show you that, or well, you can read it there because you're up front, so you can probably read that. How we doing, Sean?
I think we're good.
Okay. So on the remote sync configure, you're going to put in your IP address, and it should be your IP address, the one from your card. The port number should be 22. The target directory, that's the directory we want to sync from up on that server, is going to be /home/chef. And then we're going to set up some ignore paths, and I have that on the next slide here. This ignore files is going to be a comma-separated list. You should have 3 things in that list. If you don't do this part, it's fine. Like, it's just going to synchronize more files, but you don't need these files locally. So you should type in each one of these, and that's a .chefdk /*, and then a comma, and then a space, and then a .chefdk /*/.**, and then a comma, and then a .gem /*. And then the next thing you need to do is put in your credentials. So make sure you hit the password button down here at the bottom. By default, it tries to use your private key. So you want to hit password, and then you want to type in your username and password. And you'll see that I put the password on this thing, but you can also see that it's the wrong password on this thing. So don't use this password, use the password that's written down over there. And then make sure you have checked update on save. And then you can hit save on that thing. And then the final step is to open up that command palette again. And the way you open that command palette is Control or Command Shift P. And then type in the word remote. And you'll see that there's a remote sync download all option. And so what you want to do is download all, and that should download, I think, 4 or 5 files for you. Yes? Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yep, I just took that.
So let's close this.
Yeah.
Let's create a new folder locally. Exit out of there. You're so like create a folder somewhere where you want to store all of the work from today, right? And then open up that folder in Atom. Yeah. And then go back to your remote sync configure. Let's just make sure that it's set up properly there. Check the configuration first. Yeah, you're gonna have to reset
Okay.
all of that.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Okay. Figure. Looks right, right?
Yeah. Okay, you did it.
Okay. Create a new folder. Did that solve it? Okay.
Plant property fetch file tree.
Did you, can I see that? Yeah. Let's try that. There's different ways. Let's go back.
Maybe that's okay.
Same thing. Have you tried restarting? I mean, I know that's a stupid answer. It's the answer that says, I don't know. So I'm gonna check.
No, it's not just
Oh, they do these.
Yeah, it's like, control shift.
Yeah, and that's something that's
Coffee script.
I'm actually trying to
What's the file tree? What was it?
Chef.
No, the file tree error.
It's file, fetch file. It seems like a copy script. But it's on a local package.
Okay, I got it.
Yeah. You got yours?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Transport, have a
have a
key to that.
I have a name in my home directory, so I'm gonna get a new card.
Oh. Sorry, say again?
You have to add transport SCP to the JSON file.
Oh, to the JSON file, add transport SCP.
It's the same as SSH.
Or toggle the, it's the default.
And they're chef.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, transport.
So what does the video when I'm doing
Yeah, I'm not really sure about it. I'm getting, oh, yes. Having the wrong username and password will definitely generate a bunch of. But I had the right one,
Yep,
and I got
that's
an
right.
error, so I'm trying to figure out if that error is actually important, because it looks like we're getting the error. So, sorry, do it now, real quick. Yeah, that's the same one. So I'm trying to figure out if that's actually an error that is important, or if it's just some weird, like, you know, there's your hack attack
Oh, do a, open up your package or your command template, control shift T, do remote sync. Do reload.
Yeah, it has to be shut.
All right, awesome. All right, so
Okay.
let me set mine up so that you can all see how this goes also. So, because we've learned a couple of things here, and I want to make sure everybody learns the same things. Okay, so I'm right now in my home directory locally. So my PWD, if I type that in my terminal, is users Nathan Harvey. I'm going to make a dir called chef. It looks like something there already exists. I'm going to make a dir called chef-gilt or chef-git. I'm not going to make it that, though, because okay, so I have a directory here that is chef-gilt. It's an empty directory. So I'm going to open that up in Atom. Okay, so here I am in Atom in chef.gilt. I am going to do a remote sync configure, and that's going to open this up for me. And I'm going to enter in all of my information. So my IP address is this. I'm going to enter my port, which is 22. My target directory is /home/chef. My ignore paths are here. That.
There's some magical program that you can use to configure this machine automatically.
Yeah, that would be awesome, right? That. My username is chef. My password. If you're watching the live stream, don't look at this. I'm going to say upload on save and say save. And so now this, I should be able to do a command shift P and do remote sync.
Control.
Download all. And that gave me an error, a fetch file tree of undefined.
Right.
So if I look at my remote sync, so if I open up the chef-gilt and I see the remote sync here, which I do see, there's a thing that I didn't do that I should have done. And you can open up your remote sync.json. The thing I need to do here is add a transport key. And the value is going to be SCP, and then a comma after that. Sorry? I have a typo? Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Was that required?
What's that?
You said we have to do that?
Yeah, the transport is, if it's working for you, don't do anything. Like, don't touch it, whatever you do. But if it's not working for you, like it's not working for me, update that. And now I can do a Command-Shift-P. If I do a remote sync, it's going to fail again, even though I just changed something, because I need to do a remote sync reload config. And I need to make sure that I save that file first, which I did. So I'll do a remote sync reload config. And then I'm going to do a remote sync download all. And what should happen is you should see it start going through and downloading a bunch of files for you. And then those files will show up here in this directory.
Get an error timeout for handshake.
All right. So the other thing that you can do, and I'll help you with that error timeout with Handshake. If you look at this repository that I have on GitHub, there is within this repository a remote sync.json that has what your remote sync.json file should look like. So you can validate yours against this here. Maybe a little easier to see, but the right way to validate it is to go and look at that thing. So is that a question or you need help? Okay.
How do you know whether I need to do the transport?
So if you did a download all and it gave you in your directory a .bash history, a .bash logout with that bash profile, maybe one other file, a .bash RC, then you're good. You're gold. So who had the handshake problem? You have another problem. I'm only helping handshake problems right now. All right. Let's see what we have here. That's so the same one that you asked.
I only have a unique workstation.
That's the internal one at so you are you SSH?
Okay, what was going on? Like, what's the machine thing?
What's that? Yeah, so just get that into the SSH back there. That's our. All right. Who else can I help? It doesn't do a distributed process. In theory, you could turn it into you could actually do the purpose of this exercise is to tell you that what you should do is learn Vim and Fernando. Does everyone believe me now? That's not actually the purpose of this exercise, of course. But what you should see in your Atom text editor now, you should see a bash history and a bash logout and stuff like that. So what I'd like you to do on whatever your top level folder is, right click on that thing and create, or click add a file, and then create a file. You call it whatever you want. I'm going to call mine foo, and I'm going to put into foo the word bar. So I'm going to create a file with some content in it. The content is going to be bar. When I save that file, it should automatically SCP that file back up to the server for me. So then you can switch over to your terminal, and you can do log back into your thing. And mine totally didn't work properly for me. Yours didn't either. Upload on save is set to true.
Quick question.
Yes.
Is the tool called Knife? Is it deprecated or not?
No. No, Knife is still, yeah, we still use Knife. It's not deprecated at all. Oh, right, mine got borked because I stuck this whole thing. Let's see. It might be there.
Now,
Nope.
yeah, you need to do the P thing again. The P thing. I believe you're using the password. Just get on JSON. Go to JSON, download JSON. Do Control-Shift-P. Remote space, same, and then scroll down and hit. Now.
I do. I have it in, like I'm so.
Do you know syntax highlighting helps? that syntax highlighting right there is the whole reason we're doing this whole thing, right? Because, yeah. And you should be good. Let me know if you're not.
Let's just turn and wait. Not something that would end up with comps.
How about the rest of the?
All right, I got mine to work, so I don't know what your problem is. This is so easy to do. I don't understand. So here's what we're going to do. If it's still not working for you, we're going to stop fucking with this for right now. We're going to move on and we're going to do something else, because what I've realized, like I realized this 20 minutes ago, you're welcome, that we don't actually need it for this first lab that we're going to do. Well, we need it for our next lab, but we don't need it for this lab. So let's get through this lab, and then like by lunchtime, those of you that still don't have it working, we'll totally get it solved for you then. Because this was supposed to take 10 minutes. I think we exceeded our 10-minute expectation. So I apologize for that. As I mentioned, this is the first time I've done this. It might be the last time I do this. We'll see. We'll see what happens. Cool. So let's do this. We have this problem. We don't have our text editor installed on that workstation. So let's fix that with Chef. The way that we're going to fix that with Chef, the first thing you need to do is SSH into that workstation. So if you're not already there, and you'll know whether or not you're there, show you how. You'll know if you're there or not because your prompt will say chef at something that looks like an IP address. And that is an IP address, but it's the internal Amazon IP address. So if you've tried to put that 172.31. whatever into your remote sync.json, you would see that that fails because that's not the public IP address. But so I don't have Vim. Vim is not here. The way that Chef works, we're going to use resources to describe the desired state of our system. So a resource is a thing on your system and its desired state. So the thing, in this case, I want Vim installed. What type of thing am I going to manage here? A package, exactly. So I'm going to use a chef command. There's a little utility within Chef called chef apply. So you're going to type this along with me. I'm going to type sudo chef-apply. And then I'm just going to give it a resource that I'd like applied to my system. So in double quotes, so I'm going to have a pair of double quotes. I'm only going to type one right now. I'm going to type the word package. This is a package that we want. What's the name of the package that we want? Vim or Emacs or Nano, whichever thing you want. I'm going to put that in single quotes because that's a string. And then I'm going to close the quotes. And then I'm going to remind you of something that I haven't told you yet. When I type commands and other things, you should always type what I mean, which sometimes is not what I type. And in this case, is not what I typed. So all of this is true, except I'm missing one very key part. Before this package Vim, I need a -e. And the -e says execute this thing that I'm about to give to you. So what I'm saying here is I want a package called Vim. There's something implied when I say this in the Chef DSL, and that implication, or the thing that's implied, is that this package should be installed. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the magic key, the enter key. So you should have sudo space chef-apply space -e, and then open up a double quotes, the word package, open up a single quote, the package that you want installed, Vim, Emacs, or Nano, and then close off your single quotes, close off your double quotes, and hit enter. And I will answer your question now.
Does that qualify with like a TAC Y?
Does that qualify with?
Like a TAC Y, like an answer yes?
It does not.
It doesn't?
No. It will just go ahead and do that. Oh, yes. Yes, it does. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. It's not going to ask me, are you sure you want to install
Right,
this?
so
And that,
it's
yeah, yeah.
qualifies,
Yep,
yeah,
it's,
okay.
yep, absolutely. But the thing is, you don't even need to know that or worry about that, because like Chef abstracts all that away for you. And so what you'll see here, if it's working, is package Vim action install, and it's going to go through and install that package for you. And when it's done, it's going to tell you that one resources was updated. And then if you type which Vim, you'll see that you now have Vim installed on that machine. Who's seeing an error? Damn. Errors are better, because then we can learn more. You have a question now.
In Windows, what's that, like, do you use like just a exe directory, or I know this is using yum to grab the file.
Yes.
On Windows, or using like.
Right. So the question is, we're on a CentOS box, so it's just using yum to grab that file. Well, what would it do if we were using Windows? So there is a resource type called a Windows package, but the real answer is that that underneath this resource called a package, there's a provider. The provider you don't actually access as you're writing out your policies. The provider sorts out what is the operating system, and then what package manager should I use for that. So with Windows, you might have it configured with Chocolatey or something like that, and so it would grab a Chocolatey package for you. If we were on Ubuntu, it would know to use apt, right? Yeah.
Can we set up like just like a directory that Chef can hit and then just pull up like an MSI file or something?
Yeah, you could totally do something like that. Yep, absolutely. Okay, so Vim is installed. Success. Using Chef, we've just now installed a text editor on our machine. I can do which Vim, and sure enough, it's there. Now, let's try something else. What happens if you hit your up arrow and try installing it again? So get back to sudo chef-apply -e package Vim. When you hit enter, what do you think is going to happen, or what do you know is going to happen?
Should say it's already installed.
Exactly. This machine is already in its desired state, so it's not going to do anything. And this is one of the key things about Chef. Chef manages the desired state of your configuration, of your nodes. It sees that it's already installed, it says it's up to date, and it does nothing with that resource. It just leaves it alone. So we have some slides, I think, to talk about that as well, except not in this deck. Move quickly away from that Atom thing, man. That was not as fun as I thought it was gonna be. Like when it works, you'll totally be happy with that. This stupid PowerPoint. Sometimes I'm bad at PowerPoint also. Let's get back to where we were. Please do the right thing. Nope, sure didn't. And we're gonna try one more time here. All right. So we did Chef Apply-E package Vim. If Vim isn't your jam, like you want Emacs, then you did the same thing, except you said the package name was Emacs, and it would install Emacs for you. Or if you prefer Nano, it will install Nano for you as well. So resources. We've just introduced you to your first resource, and we now have the basic understanding of how Chef works. A resource is a thing on the system and its desired state. And if you rerun the chef apply command, Chef knows that it's already there, so it doesn't change the state at all. It says that that package is already installed. This thing is up to date. So, yes?
Can you talk a little bit more about the output, so what recipe it's using?
Yeah, so actually, no. I will talk about it later. So the output here, yeah, I'll talk about it later, totally. If I don't, ask me that question again this afternoon. Okay, so resources follow what I call a test and repair model. Sometimes you'll hear Chef in our documentation or Chef, the people that you talk to, use other words to describe this process. They're mathy words like idempotent, and you should ignore them when they say that, because if you don't know what idempotent means, what you need to think is test and repair. And if you know what idempotent means, you know that when we say idempotent, it's not really idempotent. It's really test and repair. So test and repair is the way that resources work. Test and repair. So we say package Vim. The first thing that Chef will do is test. Is Vim installed? If it is installed, then Chef will do nothing. It's up to date, I'm done. If it's not installed, then it will repair the system. It will bring the system in line with the desired state by installing that thing, and then it will be done. So every resource that we write or that we execute with Chef will go through this test and repair process. It will test, is the resource in the desired state? If not, it will fix it. It will repair that and bring the resource in line with the desired state. So that's what's going to happen every time we execute Chef code. There are a bunch of resources. We've just seen the package. Here are a bunch of examples of other resources that are available to you. And then there are more than this as well. And as I mentioned earlier, you can read about all of the resources that we have available out of the box on our docs site. And although we won't do it today, you can create custom resource types. Okay, but now we have another problem. And now's kind of where we'll need that text editor thing working. But we're gonna get through this together. So I did a bad thing. Like when you learn a new language, the thing you should do all the time is start with a hello world, not start with how do I install an editor. So we need to go back and we need to start with a hello world. Let's get a hello world going. So when we're done with this exercise, you'll have a file with hello world in our home directory. So we want to open up, we're going to write our first recipe. This time, instead of using Chef Apply to just pass a resource on the command line, we're going to put it into a recipe. So we want to open up a file in your home directory called hello.rd. And within that, we're going to add a new resource, a file resource, and it's going to look like this. Now, if you did not get your Atom syncing yet back and forth between your workstation, you have two options here. You can either use Vim or Nano or Emacs, whichever thing you installed, to do this. And if that's not your jam, that's totally cool. Just create this file in Atom, and at lunchtime, I will help you get your Atom synchronizing, and you'll be able to execute this. So between now and that time, you'll be able to write the code, but you won't be able to see it in action except for on my machine or on your neighbor's machine. Is that fair? Yes, it is fair. We all agree that that's fair because I said so, and I'm at the front of the room.
How does that Emacs debug?
What's that?
Atom has your nice.
Yeah, man. So you can just like do your Emacs and your atoms. Awesome. So if this is hard to read, look at it on the local copy of this presentation deck that you have. But there was one other thing I forgot to mention, back to our social contract. It just keeps getting longer and longer, doesn't it? If you have the slides currently, locally, the thing that I do not want you to do today is copy and paste. Because today when you walked in the room, you probably already knew how to copy and paste. So I don't want you to copy this out of the PDF and paste it into your text editor. Because if you do that, at the end of the day, you'll go home and be like, boss, I learned how to copy and paste. It was awesome. I practiced it all day long. And that's no good. I want you to type this stuff for reals. That way you can start to learn some Chef. Yes?
It says mode, I'm guessing that's just the permission model.
The mode is the permissions, exactly. The mode is the permissions on that file. The other thing I'm not going to teach you today is all about Linux permissions, all the things that you wanted to know about file access permissions. You are going to trust me that what you want is the string 0644, and that's going to be just fine. So we want to save it. I'm going to leave this up for about 1 more minute, and then we're going to talk about how to make this thing happen. So how do we apply this resource on our machines? Some of you might have already figured it out. Could you, yeah, you put in the user ID instead of the string, the username? Yes. Yes, I think so. Like, try it.
Well, sometimes I want to consistent.
I don't know. Yeah, like it's easy enough to find out, right? Figure out what the Chef ID, Chef user ID is. 2000, you think? So try 2000. I don't know what the GID is, but
I think that there's a specific key.
Yeah.
Folder, maybe there's a.
I would expect it to be the same.
I think
Okay.
Docs will-
Because sometimes you want the same UID.
Right, so when you want the same UID and GID, the thing that you should do is actually manage your users so that they have the same UID and GID. And you don't want to remember that the Chef user's user ID is 2000, right? Like that's not a thing you want to keep in your brain. What you want to keep in your brain is that this file should be owned by the username Chef.
Can you do that when you create a user?
Yeah, of course. When you create a user with Chef, you can totally assign a specific UID. Yes.
I'm going to find out the answer.
It does. It works.
Does it?
Yeah. Like the cool thing about our lab environment is it's a lab environment. You can test some shit. Okay. There's a lot of talk happening, which is cool. Let's figure out how do we get this thing applied on our server. So the thing that we want to do now is we're going to use Chef apply again. I now have a recipe. And the difference between this is like a recipe right now is just a file with a resource in it. But it has more stuff than just the name of that resource like our package did. So it made sense to put it into a file. So I'm going to do sudo chef apply hello.rb. So let me go ahead and create my hello, because I didn't do that while you did yours, and I want to stay with you. Oh, that's not helpful. That's better. I'm going to do mine in Atom just because. So I'm creating a new file. It's called hello.rb. And what I'm doing here is I'm creating a file resource. It's going to have a name of hello.txt. And then I'm going to have a do and an end. And it's going to have content. That content is going to be hello world. And it's going to have an owner. That owner is going to be Chef. It's going to have a group. That group is going to be Chef. It's going to have some permissions. We call that a mode. It's going to be 0644. And it's going to have, did I have you specify an action called create? I don't know if I had you do that or not. I didn't. I'm going to do it. But guess what? It's the default action for this type, so it'll just happen. So I saved that. My synchronization is working, so I can go back over to my terminal here, and I can cat hello.rb. And sure enough, there it is. Hopefully I don't have any typos, because now what I'm going to do is sudo chef apply hello.rb. And so what's this going to do for me? What just happened here? It ran the recipe, and as it ran the recipe, what did it do? It found a resource in my recipe, and what did it do with that resource?
Create file.
It created a file, yeah, but it did something before that. What did it do before it created the file?
Test whether or not.
It tested whether or not that file was there. Test and repair, test and repair. It tested, is there a file named hello.txt with the content hello world, with this ownership and this permissions? It did not exist, so Chef created that for me. What happens if I rerun that same command right now? Nothing should happen. Well, what will happen is it will test, does that file exist? And it will see that it's there, and then it will validate that it has the right ownership, it has the right content, it has the right permissions. And it will say, hey, that file is up to date. What happens if I go in, well, let's make sure that it actually works the way we expected it to. So let me cat hello.txt. And sure enough, there it is, hello world. And in my text editor back over here in Atom, if I do the remote sync and download all, it should also show me my hello.txt locally. It's just going to take a second because I have too many big files up in there. And sure enough, there's my hello.txt. It says hello world. So Chef took this resource and it applied this resource for us. So it did the test and repair. Does this file exist? If not, repair the state of the system. What questions can I answer for you so far? Okay. Are there some of you, let's just take a quick pulse of the room. Are there some of you in this class who are like, this is going too slow and I wish it would go faster? It's cool, like you should say that. Are there some of you in this class who are like, this is going at the right pace? Yeah, cool. And are there some of you that think it's going too fast? There's no one that thinks it's going too fast. There's a portion of us that think it's going at about the right pace. And there's a portion of us that think it's going too slow. Those of you that think it's going too slow, it's cool. We're going to keep going a little bit slow for you. And I'll give you your money back at the end of the day, I promise. Okay. But everyone else, we're going to keep going at about this pace. Maybe this afternoon we'll pick up a little bit more, but at least before lunch, this is the pace we're going to go at. So if that makes you angry, I'm sorry, but it's cool. Like, I know you're not angry, dude. It's cool. Yes, you should. What you should do is flip the table and then walk out of the room and be like, that guy is fucking ridiculous. This is terrible. That was a waste of my time and money. Yes. All right, let's talk about these resources, because we just wrote some code. Not everyone in here called themselves a developer, and most of you that even called yourselves developers didn't call yourself Ruby developers. But guess what? You all just wrote some Ruby. So now, when you leave here today, you can go home and say, boss, I'm now a Ruby developer. You might not want to say that, because then your boss might have better ideas or different ideas about what you should be doing. But you can say that you know some Chef. So each resource, when we talk about the Chef DSL or the Chef language, each resource will have a type. So we've looked at two resource types right now, a file and a package. Each resource will also have a name. That name is usually meaningful. So in the case of our package, the name was the name of the package that we were managing. In the case of a file, it's the name of the file that we're managing. So hello.txt. Each will also have some things between these keywords, do and end, except when they don't, right? Like our package resource, it did not have a do and an end, because all we did was specify the package name. The things that would have appeared between the do and the end were implied. But in our file resource, we did type a do and an end. And then within this do and end, we're going to set up some things. The things that we set up will be some attributes and maybe an action. So each resource is also going to define the state of that resource. And the state for our file, when I typed in the file, I said action create. I didn't tell you to put any action in it. The default action for a file is to create that file. The default action for a package is to install that package. So if we were to take this code and read it in plain English, it would be something like this. And this is how every resource works. The name, or sorry, the type named name should be actioned. And here's a minute where I'm going to get back on a soapbox, but this time instead of talking to you about version control, I'm going to talk to you about the thing that I hate about the Chef language. Here's the thing I hate about the Chef language. We use this keyword action. And when you read and speak English, when you see the word action, you think Chef is going to do something. And the thing you expect it to do is whatever follows that word action. So you expect that Chef is going to, in this case, create a file. And you expect that anytime Chef executes this code, it's going to create the file. But that's a lie, because Chef doesn't actually create the file every time. What does it do? It tests. It always tests. If it finds itself in a state that's outside of the policy, then it will execute the action to bring that thing back in line with policy. So that is the repair action, right? So we have a type named name, and it should be actioned. And if you think about it like that and sort of put that into your head, it will also help you remember, is that action, is it created or is it create, right? The D is, or the ed is implied, right? This thing will be created if necessary. There's another weird thing that happens here when we wrote this code. Create isn't a string. It has this colon in front of it. Now, if you're a Ruby developer, you'll know that that's a symbol. If you're not a Ruby developer, I just told you, that's called a symbol. So it has this colon right in front of this keyword. The thing about a symbol in Ruby is it's a memory-efficient way of storing an immutable value. Now, if what I just said sounded like Latin to you, that's cool. The thing you need to know is in the code examples that I give and the code that I write, if I put a colon in front of a thing, you should put a colon in front of a thing. And when you look at the source code, when you look at the documentation, if it has a colon in front of it, put a colon in front of it. That's really all you need to know about symbols. Those of you that are Ruby developers in the room are like, Nathan, there were 17 other things that you need to tell everybody about symbols. You're right, but I'm not going to. So it's cool. We're just going to move on. Unless there are questions. Yes?
How do you comment in Ruby?
How do you comment in Ruby?
I just want to comment this.
Yes, absolutely. You use a hash mark or a pound sign. And everything that follows that hash mark or pound sign is considered a comment until the end of the line. How do you do multi-line comments in Ruby? What's that? Is it block comments like in C? No?
You do a bunch of hashes.
You put a hash mark at the front of every line that you want in your multi-line comment. There is a different way to do it, but no one uses that way. So the way that you do multi-line comments in Ruby is you put a hash mark in front of multiple lines. That's how you do multi-line comments in Ruby. It is. It's true, right? Nobody uses the other way. Does anyone know the other way to do multi-line comments? If you do, don't tell us. Just like shake your head yes. I learned it from a student. Like I said that in a class. Like the only way to do it is multi-line, and somebody was like, actually, what you can do is, and told me the right way to do it, and it works, but nobody ever uses it. Yeah, exactly. So the file name hello.txt should be created. This is what this resource says. Chef resources can also include other details about the state of the resource. And those details, again, will appear between the do and the end. For a file, you might have something like the ownership of that file. Now, each resource has its own custom set of attributes that you can specify. For example, a package probably doesn't have ownership associated with it. But it might have a version number associated with it. Like what version of the Vim package do you want installed? Whereas a file resource probably does not have a version number that you want to manage. So you have to check the docs for the various parts of the state that you can specify in the attributes within a resource. The other thing to know about these, between the keyword do and the keyword end, the order in which you list those attributes does not matter. You can list them in any order you like. So when I typed in my file resource, I totally listed the things in a different order than what I told you to list them in. I did that on purpose, and because I don't remember the order that I put them in the slide. But it doesn't matter. So to further our English sentence here, how do we describe this resource? The type named name should be actioned with these specific attributes. So in this case, the file named hello.txt should be created with content of hello.txt, with permissions of 0644, with group and owner of Chef. This is how Chef works. It's so super important that you understand resources, because from resources, everything is built on top of these resources with Chef, which is why we take so much time this morning, like drilling into you. This is how a resource works in Chef. It's test and repair every time. This is what a resource looks like. Once you understand this, you know everything you need to know about Chef, and you can go home now. That's not actually true. I prefer it if you stay for the rest of the day, because we'll teach you a bunch of other stuff as well. But given that this is so fundamental, what questions can I answer?
So I just have a question about is the indentation in a single declaration per line of just readability?
Yeah, so the question was about the indentation and the single thing per line. Is that just about readability? So as what you see here, like after this do, there is an indent here. Ruby, as it reads and executes this code, does not care about that indentation. Who cares about that indentation? Yeah, well, we're not doing Python, so that's not the right answer. Anybody else care about that indentation? I do. I give a shit about that indentation, and so should you. So before this word action here, that should be 2 spaces. It should not be a tab. It should not be 4 spaces. It can be a tab if you've configured your text editor such that when you hit the tab, it inserts 2 spaces. But it should be 2 spaces always and everywhere, forever and ever. And the reason it should be that is because that's what the Ruby community has determined is the right way to write Ruby. It doesn't actually matter. The thing that's most important is that the indentation that you use is the same as everyone else on your team. And so to be helpful to everyone, that should be 2 spaces. The fact that we have action on one line and content on another and mode on another, we could put those all on the same lines, maybe, but no one ever does that. And like, I wouldn't even try.
Is the order of those parameters important?
The order of the parameters between do and end, absolutely not important. Yes?
How would you concatenate it on one line?
How would I concatenate all of that on one line?
Is it comma delimited or?
Yeah, no, not comma delimited. So if I wanted to do like the package apply -e and do this, right, I would use semicolons at the end of the line. Yes? The owner and group on a file can be, well, so the question was, can owner and group be anything you want them to be? The right answer is yes, maybe. So yes, the owner and group can be anything you want them to be, as long as they are a valid user and a valid group on that system, right? So they can be any owner that is a valid user on that system. Of course, you can use Chef to manage the users on that system. So you might create the user and then assign a file as owned by that user. And also then, like, anything you want them to be, as long as it's a valid username on that system, right? Which, and the parameters of what makes a valid username are likely different on Windows than they are on Linux platform. And when I say likely, what I meant is definitely are different. But so does that answer your question?
Can you create users with the Chef admin?
You wouldn't create the user through Chef admin. You'd create a user like this. So there's a user resource. So you'd have a user whose name might be Nathan, and then you might have some attributes about Nathan, like my user ID, my password, my group ID. So I would create that using Chef. Or potentially, your systems are hooked up to some central authentication system like LDAP or Active Directory, and then you have users that are available through that.
If you were to pick up the Chef code that's actually making this happen, all it's doing under the hood is calling chmod, Chef, and then have the file. Chown, or chmod 0644 chown Chef Chef hello text. So,
yeah. So Chef is absolutely just using the underlying mechanics of the operating system to make this thing happen. The good thing about that, though, is that when you use Chef, you don't need to understand the underlying mechanics of the operating system. And if I were to run this on a CentOS box or a Windows box, it would work the same way for me.
Even using permission schemes?
So there's a different keyword for permissions on files, right? So this, and that question goes back to, like, you have to understand the systems that you're automating in order to do this, right? Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, the downside of using Chef to do all this stuff is you actually start to forget what the real commands are. Like,
It's
like
totally
user
true.
ad versus ad user and all the different little flags and all like those little weird things, like they start to slowly fall out.
Yes, it is. It's a terrible, sad thing. I don't remember if it's ad user or user ad.
You can actually use both nowadays.
Yeah, and you can use both, maybe.
Can you nest resources?
Can you nest resources? It doesn't make sense. Sean says yes, and I'm saying it doesn't make any sense, and no. It's the answer to that question is beyond the answer to that question is beyond the scope of this course. So for now, listen to me. No. All right. What other questions can I answer for you about resources? These are all great questions, and I hope that everyone's learning a little something extra. Yes.
So it's like this. You assume some like starting state of the system. You know, how do you go about bootstrapping, like getting CentOS on the box and like getting Chef on the CentOS?
Right, sure. So the question was, this assumes some start state of the system. Like I gave you a system that actually already had Chef installed, and before that was already a CentOS box, right? It had an operating system installed and so forth. So the answer there is it depends. Let's say that you work on Amazon, so you have some resources up on the cloud. With Chef, there's a way that you can create a new instance up on Amazon, so you can go from 0 to having an instance where Chef is installed and it's configured this way. Now, there are actually a couple of ways to do that, and we're not going to get into either of them here, but I'll tell you about both of them right now. There's a tool with Chef called Knife. Knife is a command line tool that you use to do a bunch of stuff with Chef that we probably won't actually touch today. We'll just use the Chef command. But with Knife, you have some plugins available to you, and there are plugins for many of the infrastructure as a service providers. So there's a Knife EC2 plugin, there's a Knife OpenStack plugin, there's a Knife DigitalOcean plugin, a Knife VMware plugin. And so from that, you can do Knife EC2 server create, and then you specify like the base AMI that you want to create an image of, and then you can specify here's the policy that I want to lay down on it, and so forth. The other way to do that, there's a new piece within Chef called Chef Provisioner. And what Provisioner does is it gives you a new resource type, or actually there's a couple of new resource types that you have, but the one that's important is a resource type called a machine. And so with a Chef recipe, you can say, I want a set of machines. I want a cluster of machines, and this is how I want them named, and so forth. And then that Chef Provisioner can go and create those machines on AWS or on DigitalOcean. Now, if you have a data center, like I have physical hardware, I want to plug in a box and then have it turn into a CentOS machine, right? There are ways that you can do that also. So Chef Provisioner may or may not right now support like PXE booting, but certainly will in the future if it doesn't yet.
Can you make containers?
Can you make containers? Sure, make containers with Chef, because Docker. Oh, I mean Rocket. Yeah.
Dr. Rocket?
Dr. Rocket. Awesome. What other questions can I answer? All right, let's see what's coming next then. All right, so we did Chef Apply hello.rb. We did it again. Things are up to date. Feels like I'm running. All right, so I have some questions for you, and you should try these out also. So, what if you change the content of hello.txt using your favorite editor? What's going to happen? Depends on the change. All right, so let's say I open up. Let's kind of walk through this. So I have my hello.txt over here. It says hello world, right? If I go into this file and I change it from hello world to hello Nathan, and I save that file, it synced it back up to my workstation for me. So now here, if I cat hello.txt, it says hello Nathan. It's awesome. What happens when I run Chef again?
It'll change it.
It'll change it back, right? Because when I run Chef again, it's going to do test and repair. It's going to test the state of that file. Is it in the right state? It's not. So it's going to repair it for me. This is something that's super important to just stop for a minute and think about. So you've got your infrastructure fully automated with Chef, and something broke. And the thing that broke was a change that Chef introduced. But I know how to fix it. I'll log into that box and I'll fix that file that Chef just broke for me. What's the problem with doing that? Chef is going to come back and fix your fix and break your shit again, right? So at this point, from this point forward, once you start managing your resources within Chef, anytime you want to change the state of a resource that's managed with Chef, the way that you change that is in Chef. You update your recipe, you commit that into your version control system, then you deploy that across your infrastructure. So you should stop editing your files manually or stop doing your configuration things manually, because Chef will come along and make sure that the policy is being followed. So some other questions.
So I just have a question about that.
Yeah.
It's a complicated install, right? There's going to be some install script.
Yes.
And the Chef resource is going to pull that script. So really, you're still editing the script on the install side, right?
So the question there is, in a more complicated thing, you're going to have an install script that you execute.
Yeah.
And Chef will start executing that install script for you. So if you need to change something, you're actually changing that install script, and then Chef reruns that install script. If you're using Chef to execute like the bash script that you already have, then yes, that much is true. But if you're using Chef to execute a bash script that you already have, that's a great first start, and you're not done. Like, you want to get rid of that bash script and turn all of that stuff into Chef resources. In practice, that's what you want to do, okay? That may absolutely be where you started with Chef, and it is where you want to move away from as soon as you can.
Sometimes you gotta write some bash.
Sometimes you write some bash, for sure, for sure.
Or some
So it's not like,
And in that case, you wanna make sure that there's.
But really, you're going to drop
Be
that
careful
all
about the side effects of your script.
into that RB document. That's gonna be
Exactly.
the script.
so is it completely like, does Chef have the ability to completely remove Dash from your setup, or is that like a little too?
So does Chef have the ability to completely remove bash from your setup? I don't know. Tell me how complex your setup is. Don't actually do that, right? So like there are lots of resources within Chef, and probably they will cover everything that you need. But when they don't, you can totally, there's a resource called a script resource or a bash resource. And so the way that you define that resource is you give it some bash, and it will go and do that thing. The problem with doing that is, how does Chef know test and repair, right? If you don't tell it, if you don't teach Chef how to test for the state of that thing, if it doesn't know how to test, it will always repair. So it will run that bash script every time it encounters it, which may or may not be the thing that you want to have happen.
So you could just add like a flag pretty much. It's
Yeah.
a flag, you're done.
Yeah, exactly, right? And there's these things within Chef resources called guards that are basically those flags that you can create custom tests in that test and repair cycle. So if this test is true, don't do anything. What happens if you change the ownership of that file? If you chmod hello.txt, when you run Chef apply, it's going to update that back to 0644. And of course, I said ownership. So that's not 0644. That's, instead of root, it will now be owned by Chef again. And if you delete the file, it will recreate it for you. What if you wanted to use Chef to delete the file? You would change your action. What would you change it to? Delete or remove. I don't know. Like, I'd read the doc. It's delete. I think it's delete.
So for things like that where, you know, if you have some resource in there and then you decide to remove it, do you just leave that delete in there forever? Or
Right. So this is a good question. Let's say I have
kind
a
of one-offs?
let's say I have a resource that I was managing with Chef, and now I don't want that. Like, I want that file to go away. Right. So what I can do is I would update my Chef code. How would I update my Chef code? If I removed that resource from my recipe, what would happen next time I ran Chef? Nothing. It would leave that file there because it's not testing that file anymore. It doesn't care about it. So if you have a file that you want removed, you would have to put an action delete. And then the question was kind of following up on that. Well, now do I leave this definition of this file should be deleted? Do I leave that definition in my Chef recipes forever? And I would say maybe. Like, you leave it, it depends on the file that you're deleting, right? If it's a file that the base operating system laid down and you don't want that file there, then yeah, you're gonna leave it in your Chef recipe forever. You want it in your chef recipe as long as there's a chance that that file could exist. And also that you care that that file doesn't exist, right? Can you do a sequence of actions? So when we look at recipes, I will tell you that resources in a recipe are executed in the order in which they're defined in a recipe. So yes. All right. Yes.
Just so I'm following that.
Yeah.
So the resource declaration order didn't matter, but the recipe stuff implies the order will matter there, right?
The actions and the attributes between do and end, the order there doesn't matter. But if I have two resources in a file, so if I have a package and a service, the package will always be executed first. Yeah. And by executed, of course, what we mean is test and repair, right? It will be tested first, repaired if necessary, and then the next one will be tested and repaired if necessary.
Can you do multiple actions for one block?
Can you do multiple actions for one resource? Yes, you can. Absolutely. And we'll definitely look at an example of that later today. I'll show you exactly how. So we have a bunch of other types of resources, just a reminder here, and you can find them all on the docs site. So now I have some questions for you. You've been asking me a lot of questions, so now I'm going to ask you some questions. What states can a file be in? What's that? A file resource. So which states can they be in? And what I really care about is what actions can you take on a file? Create, delete. Anyone know any others?
But it's got all the attributes of ownership and group permission.
Yeah, it would have all of those attributes like group permissions and such. So another action is touch. You can touch a file. What's another action?
Create if missing.
Create if missing. How'd you know those things? We didn't talk about those.
Something else, and yes, actually list out available options.
Yeah, so it listed all the available options. How did you get that? You typed in a bad action?
I typed it in update, and you say update is not one of them.
Ah, okay.
Just list out the whole thing.
So in order to find out the other actions that were available, he wrote bad code, and then the error message said you should only use these actions. How else could you have sorted out what the proper actions are? You could read the docs, right? But who does that? It's better to write bad code and let Chef tell you. That's totally cool. So, where are the docs? Who can tell me where the docs are? Docs.chef.io. Yes. There are probably other 6 different docs.thing because we like to change our domain name all the time also. So what state will a file be in if you don't declare an action? It will be created. That file will be created. And what state will a package be in if you don't declare an action? It will be in install, right? Do you have to indent the attributes of a resource? Do you have to indent the attributes of a resource?
Yes.
Yes. And how far should you indent them? 2 spaces. All right, very good. What chef tool allows you to easily explore resources? These are words that I didn't say to you. Docs, yeah. Chef Apply really is the answer that I'm looking for here. So we've used Chef Apply a couple of times. The thing that you will not do in production is use Chef Apply. Like, it's a little toy for us to use as a learning tool. There's another tool that we're going to talk about called Chef Client, and that's what's going to be what actually applies your policies for you. But Chef Apply is a nice, easy way for you to just mess around and play with various resources. I find myself using Chef Apply like when I want to create a user. Like that chef user that's on that machine, I'm sure that chef user got there because I ran Chef Apply to create a user named Chef, because I don't remember if it's user add or add user or what all the flags are. And instead of looking at man, I just wrote the chef recipe because I know how to do that. All right, now I'm going to give you another lab, but I'm not going to tell you how to do this lab. I'm just going to tell you some things about it. So in this lab, you should create a file who lives at /etc/motd. Its content should be property of company name. And you can either use company name or your company name. Like, it doesn't actually matter what the company name is. And it should have permissions of 0644. It should be owned, and the group ownership and user ownership should be root. So what I'd like you to do is take some time to write this code. I don't know if that's easier. That's probably harder to read. So I'll switch it back to just black. You should probably write this as a new recipe. So you could put it in your hello.rb. That would be fine. You could also put it in a separate file, maybe called motd.rb. It's really up to you what you do. But write the recipe that will make this true on your machine. And if you need help, ask a neighbor or ask me or Sean. And I'm going to give you like 7 minutes to complete this. At 1:45, we're going to start talking again. And by we, I mean me.
I was surprised that that's.
We've got other. So if you're changing the mode.
Yeah, there's some stuff.
That's why it's faster.
No,
Who can I help?
Actually.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I haven't tried it. Actually, I haven't used well, I mean,
No, so, we're gonna fix that later. I don't know why it doesn't show up right now. There's something weird that I cannot answer. But
thing is like, so which chefs are chefs? One RPM or whatever, is like.
yeah, it's
Gigantic.
like the short answer is not. What you really want to do is
Postgres,
like there are ways to do it. Like check out the program, right? So you want to do something? Yeah, you can do that. Is it the right way? Is it the easy way?
I'm not sure which process you start
Okay, I'm gonna do mine now. So if you'd like to watch what I do, you can see the same thing, and maybe it's close to what you wrote as well. So from my text editor, I'm gonna create a new file. I'm gonna call this one motd.rb. It's gonna be a file. Its name is Etsy motd. Let's see, I said the content should be property of company name. Say that. The mode should be 0644. Did I tell you to do that? I don't know. Yeah, I told you to do the ownership and the group. That's what I'm going to type, and that just got synchronized up. Did you do something different than this? Do you have to do action create? I'm not going to. It's the default action for a file is create. So it will, by default, just do that. So the action of create is implied here. The nice thing about that is I didn't have to type it. The downside of that, though, is if I don't know that the default action is to create it, then this code isn't clear. Like, I don't know what's going to happen when I execute this code. So it would, like, for some, you could make the argument that it's better to actually specify the action, even if it's the implied action. Because then when I read the code, I know exactly what's going to happen without having to remember what's implied for each one. But I'm just going to let the magic happen here, and it's just going to automatically create that file for me.
So is that what I want to do?
And Sean would be like, Nathan, you're doing it wrong. And I agree. Like, I would usually do that. Yes?
Does every resource have an action?
Does every resource have an action? Every resource absolutely has an action. And the default action may or may not be what you expect it to be.
Does every resource have a default?
Does every resource have a default action? I think the answer is yes, but I don't know if you're trolling me and like trying to test my knowledge or what. Does every resource have a default action? Do you know? No, not every resource has a. It has a default action. It's called none, right? Yeah, none is an action. Yeah, or it might be nothing in that case, right? Yes. So it has a default action. That default action doesn't do anything, but it has a default action. I win. Okay, so I got this thing, and of course it's here. It got synchronized up. So cat hello motd.rb. It exists there, and it looks good. I have another question though. I've been using double quotes here for around all of my strings. Could I use single quotes? You guess I could? Yeah, those of you that guessed I could, you guessed correctly. So Ruby doesn't care if you use double quotes or single quotes for strings, except when it does. And I'll tell you when it does later, but right now it does not. Right? So right now you can use double quotes or you can use single quotes. And some of you are purists and are like, single quotes are totally faster and more efficient and better. And like you can keep believing that. That's fine. Use whichever you prefer, double quotes or single quotes. It's fine. I'm not going to get in an argument with you about that. Yes? What about escape sequencing? So and sort of the answer is you need double quotes when you're going to interpolate some values or do some variable replacement. That's when you need double quotes. And escape sequencing, you use backslash to escape stuff. Yep.
Actually, awesome. The escape sequencing counts as interpolation.
Well, yeah, sure. Okay. So how do I make my MOTD file be there? So I wrote this recipe. What do I do next? Yeah, I need to sudo chef apply it. So I'll go ahead and run that. And what is MOT, like what is this file? It's the message of the day, which means what? Yeah, when you connect to this server, when you SSH into this machine, it should show you that message of the day. How many of you tested, did it work? And did it work for you? It didn't work. Like, I cannot explain it. No, it's going to work later, and we're not going to do much to, like, we're not going to change the SSH configuration at all. I don't know why it's not working. It's weird, because do you know what else is weird? If you, like, sudo vi the file, and then write and quit it, without changing anything, then it will work. So, which is also curious. I cannot explain it. So that thing I said about you should understand your systems before you automate them, this is clearly not where I stand today. I don't understand my system right now, but I'm automating it anyhow. Later, we're going to change how it works, how we write that MOTD file, and then it's going to just work properly for us. There might be some, I don't know what's going on there. In any case, though, right now, I can know that it works because what I can do is I can cat etc MOTD. And sure enough, it tells me they're a property of Chef Software. And yours should say property of company name, but not company name. It should be the company name that you used, which might be company name, of course. Did anyone get an error when you ran your thing?
I got because I didn't use sudo.
Because you didn't use sudo, you got an error, right? So that's cool. Anyone else get an error? Errors are fun because we can learn more from errors. Yeah. All right. So that was an easy-ish exercise. So now you're super smart on Chef. So resources, about resources, what questions can I answer for you? Any additional questions? All right, I suspect lunch is going to show up. I don't know exactly like what the protocol on lunch is, if they're bringing it in here, if they're going to set it up in the kitchen. I expect someone will tell us when lunch is here. So I'm just going to keep going if that's cool with everybody. And when lunch shows up, we'll break for lunch. But let's move on and start talking about recipes. So we actually wrote a recipe, but our recipe so far only has one resource in it. We're just chef applying it. This isn't the way that we're going to manage our systems in the real world. We're going to start writing bigger, more complex recipes. We're going to put those recipes in cookbooks and so forth. So let's dig into what that is. So we have resources like packages, files, templates. We're going to take those resources and put them into recipes. So our motd.rb is a recipe. That recipe has one resource in it. So you can use chef apply to apply a single resource from the command line, or you can use chef apply to apply a file, a recipe from your system. So a recipe is a collection of resources. And then a cookbook is basically a package for your policy information. So you write your resources in recipes. You store your recipes in cookbooks. So far, we've only written recipes. We haven't written a cookbook yet. We're going to write a cookbook now. So a recipe is a collection of resources. It might look something like this. So here we have 3 resources in this recipe. We have a package, we have a template, and we have a service resource. So in this one, like, you don't have to understand this code. It should look relatively familiar to you, though. We have a package called HA Proxy. We have a template. It's our HA Proxy config file. And we have a service. It's the HA Proxy service. And there was a question earlier about you have multiple actions. Here's a case where we have multiple actions for the same service. So this HA Proxy service has an action of enable and has an action of start. We list them as an array, or in those square brackets separated. The resources in a recipe are always applied in the order that they're listed in that recipe. So in this case, the package HA Proxy will always be tested and repaired first. Once that's been fixed, it will then move on to the template, and finally it will test and repair the service. So if there's an error on the package, what will happen is the chef client or the chef apply will stop executing. It will not try to apply further resources in that recipe. If the first one fails, it will throw a stack trace and it will exit. So, yes?
Is it possible to make them transactional?
Is it possible to make them transactional as well? Like, do all of this recipe, and if this entire recipe fails, then roll, or if something in this recipe fails, then roll back to the previous state? No, it's not. Next question. Like, that was your question also. Wait, yes?
Oh, can it run recipes non-blocking?
I'm sorry, what?
Can it run recipes non-blocking?
Can it run recipes non-blocking? Tell me what you mean by that.
Like, that it would not small process if one recipe.
Oh, I see. Okay. So if I have a resource that fails, I want it to keep going anyhow. It can. There's an attribute on your resources that's called. There's an attribute that's called something like I think it's called ignore failure. By default, the ignore failure attribute is set to false. So if it fails, it's not going to ignore that failure. But in a resource itself, you can say ignore failure and set it to true. And then if that resource failed, Chef will keep going. You probably don't want that. Like, there's a reason that ignore failure is set to false by default. Like, that's probably the case that you want. You want it to throw an error when there is a problem. But there might be a special use case where that's not exactly what you want. And you'll find that when you get to it. But like, for now, stick with the default. Yeah. All right. Oh, sorry. So a cookbook is really a package for chef policies. A cookbook typically maps one-to-one to an application or a piece of software in your state. So you might have, as an example, a cookbook for MySQL that will manage your MySQL database, or the installation and configuration of that. You may actually have a separate cookbook or you would have a separate cookbook for Apache, for your web server, or a separate cookbook for HA Proxy. So think about your cookbooks as these relatively small building blocks that you would combine together to describe the policy of your resource. And some of your cookbooks will be used on multiple systems. So maybe on every system in your infrastructure, you're managing users, so the user's cookbook will be applied. But only on a subset of your systems are they database systems, and others are application servers, and others are load balancers or monitoring servers. So like, you're not gonna put the Nagios monitoring server recipe on your database server. You might have a Nagios client over there, but you wouldn't have the Nagios server over there. So you want to build your cookbooks in such a way that you can share them across other parts of your infrastructure. Don't get too crazy, like my infrastructure should not be a cookbook. That's too much stuff in that one thing.
Although I've seen it back.
Yeah, well, yeah, you can totally do it. That doesn't mean it's right. It just means it might work for you, which makes it right, but you shouldn't really do that. So cookbooks are this distribution unit. So when I take a cookbook, one of the things that is nice about Chef is that when you write a cookbook, you can share it with everyone else in the world. We have this site called the Supermarket, supermarket.getchef.io, where anyone who writes a cookbook can go and publish their cookbook and share it with the world. So if you don't know how to install MySQL, you could go to the Supermarket, grab the MySQL cookbook, and run that within your infrastructure, which is awesome. But the bad side of that is that anyone who writes a cookbook and wants to share it can publish it up to the Supermarket. Right? So sometimes the cookbooks on the Supermarket are not the cookbooks you're looking for. They may feel like the cookbooks you're looking for, but they might not be, right? The thing is that you need to understand what you're automating, so you need to understand how that cookbook goes about automating that thing, and only use it if it solves your problem also. But as you get better with Chef, it's awesome for you to share your Chef knowledge and your newfound Chef cookbooks with the rest of the community. One of the things that makes it awesome is somebody might call you up and say that cookbook is shit, and let me help you make it better. That would be great. So the cookbooks are also versioned. So we'll see that when we create a cookbook, every cookbook is going to have a version number associated with it. So there's versioned in the fact that they're in a version control system, but then there's also the version of the package. So when we create a cookbook, it's going to start off with a version number of 0.1.0. It's also going to have some SHA when we commit it into Git, but the package itself is going to have a specific version number. And what we will do with our recipes, we will put them onto a Chef server. When we put them onto a Chef server, they become that artifact at that version number. And of course, they're also reusable. So one of the things that Chef allows you to do is abstract your data about your infrastructure from the policy about your infrastructure. So you can manage these two as separate entities. And if you're an application developer, this might make sense to you. Like if you've ever written a web application, you don't want to put all of your like database transaction code in the same file where you have your display code. Like that doesn't make any sense. Well, maybe if you're a PHP developer, that's what you do. But everyone else, like you don't want to do that. You want to manage those things separately. So the policy is the desired state of the system, and then the data are the details about that desired state. Let's look at some examples of that. So for example, you should have Tomcat installed. That's your policy. Tomcat should be here. The data says which version of Tomcat should be here. Version number 6 should be here. You should be able to manipulate that data separate from manipulating your policy. So I could just, without changing my policy, I could upgrade Tomcat by just changing my data. Switch the data value for the policy. Instead of being version 6, I would flip that data to version 7. Is there a question? Yes.
Does Chef have a central server?
Does Chef have a central server? Yes. So there's a Chef server that lives within your infrastructure where all of your stuff gets hosted, except when you don't, right? You don't have to have a Chef server, but yeah, you could totally have everything on each node, but you probably don't want to do that. But maybe you do, like, and that's cool, but you should probably have a Chef server. Yeah. Another example, a file should exist and it should have some content. The content of that file should be managed separate from the fact that the file exists. So I want to have a policy that says create a file called hello.txt. What content should be in hello.txt? Look over here in this other file. It has the content for hello.txt. Let's manage those two things as separate entities. So let's look at our MOTD file that we just created. We have this problem. The policy and the state are all intermingled into the same file. So I have this recipe, MOTD, and I put the content of the MOTD file directly in that recipe. That's kind of bad. What I want to do is manage that content in a separate file. So we'll know that we're done when the state and the content are managed independently from one another. And the way that we're going to do this is we're going to create a cookbook. So our message of the day, it looks something like this. We have file, MOTD, we have the content. So the policy is everything except for the content itself. And the data or the content is that content attribute, property of company name. So I really want to manage that property of company name as a separate thing. So in order to do that, first we need to put our stuff in version control. And you know what I haven't done so far, and that's really bad of me, is I haven't put it in version control yet. So I'm going to do this thing. Actually, you should do this thing also, but don't do this thing yet. And so I'm not going to do the thing that you shouldn't do. We're going to talk about that. So before we go any further, we need to make sure that we have a version control system on our workstation. So what version control system do you think we should install there? Git. Yeah, I don't know why you think Git, but you're right. It's totally Git that we should install there. So in this next lab, we're actually going to do 3 things here. First, we're going to install Git. Then we're going to create a Chef repo, so a folder where we're going to keep all of our Chef policies. And then we're going to create a cookbook to manage our MOTD. So how are you going to install Git? With Chef Apply, maybe. Chef Apply package Git. That sounds like a good thing. But here's a problem with just using Chef Apply package Git. Git requires some other stuff to go along with it for it to work properly for you, like a git config file. We're going to actually manage both of those. So here's what I want you to do to install Git. I want you to, this is kind of like our MOTD recipe or lab that we just had. I'm not actually going to give you a whole lot of detail on how to do this. I'm just going to give you some instructions. So I want you to write a file. You'll probably call it git.rb. And that's going to be a recipe with 2 resources in it. It's going to have a package resource in it, which isn't listed on this slide, as it turns out. That package is going to be what? Git, right? So we should have a package Git, and then we should have a file resource. That file should be in home/chef, and it should be named .gitconfig. And in that file, the content should be like this. In brackets, the word user, a \n, which is for a new line, and then 2 spaces, name equals John Doe, but you should not type John Doe, you should type your name. And then a \n for a new line character again, 2 more spaces, and then email equals, and you should put in your email address, and then a /n to close off that file. So we're going to have 2 resources here, a package resource and a file resource. And this way, when you start using Git, it won't complain at you. So I'm going to give you a minute to type that up. If you have questions or need help, you have neighbors, and you also have me and Sean who can help you out. You want that back, don't you? Yeah. I'll give it back to you just a second. Can you see that okay? I'm even going to give you the answer here so you can check it out. So did the recipe you wrote look something like this? So a question, in which order will these resources be applied? First the package will be installed, and then the file will be generated. Does the order matter in the recipe? Yeah, it does. Like every time Chef runs, it's going to install the package, and then it's going to make sure the file is in the right place. In this particular case, like in the real world, does the order of these two operations matter? Could I write the file first and then install the package? In this case, I could. It probably doesn't matter.
Is the mode default here?
Yeah, so I didn't specify a mode. What's up with that? Every time we wrote a file before, we've specified a mode. So what permissions is this file going to get?
Depends on the default UMask of the system.
Exactly. It depends on the default behavior of the system. So the UMask for that system is going to determine what the ownership of this file is going to be. Do you see the danger in that? Like if the UMask on system A is different than the UMask on system B, you're probably not managing your UMask with Chef, number one. And number two, they're going to be inconsistent. So you could fix that by like managing your UMask everywhere.
Just make it 777.
Or you could just like make it 777 because it's probably fine, right? Yeah, no one cares about that. Or you could just specify the permissions that you actually want here. So I happen to know that on this system, it's going to default to something that's fine. And I also happen to know that this is a lab system that I'm going to throw away later. So whatever it is definitely fine. Yes?
I'm sorry, you may have mentioned this earlier.
That's okay.
Slightly zoned out. Does Chef's compiler differentiate between single?
Yeah, so Ruby cares about single and the double there. I think on the content line, we have to have double quotes. Anywhere else where I have single quotes, you could totally use double quotes there. It doesn't matter. All right, I'm going to go ahead and apply my recipe. So I'll do sudo chef apply git.rb. And that's going to first make sure that Git is installed. And as it turns out, I already did this on my machine. I did it in advance of the class. So it's going to tell me that Git is up to date. And then it's going to check my file. And it's going to tell me that my file is up to date. But for you, it should install Git. And it should update that file. Yes?
Previously, when we installed Vim, we just gave a package Vim. We didn't have a do on it. So when we write a recipe,
yes.
Can I give just like package Git and not give the do in?
Yes, absolutely. So the question was, when we installed the package Vim, we just said chef apply -e package Vim. We didn't have a do and an end at all. We didn't specify an action or any attributes. We just accepted the defaults. So in our recipe, you can do the exact same thing. In my recipe, I said action install, but I didn't need to. If I left that out and left off the do in the end, the right thing would have happened, like the same thing would have happened. This, by specifying it though, excuse me, it's a little bit less magical, like what's going to happen. We're a little bit more clear in our intent. Although, like, I'm totally inconsistent when I do it. Of course, I specified the default action on my package, but not on my file. I'm like, yeah, whatever, the file will be fine. It'll just do the right thing, right? All right, so now that I have Git installed, that's super awesome. You should be able to do like a which Git, and it will tell you that now Git is installed there. So that's great. That was step one of this lab. I don't know, are we supposed to eat that food? Is that our lunch, or is that? Oh, okay, very good. All right, so we did a sudo chef apply Git, so we got Git installed. The next thing we want to do is create a chef repo or a chef repository. So our cookbooks and other policy files should all be stored in a version control system. Of course, we're going to use Git today. If you don't know how to use Git, it's cool. Like, you don't actually have to store your stuff in Git today. But I'm also going to show you all the Git commands as we go, so you can just follow along and do that. So we want to create a directory named chef repo, but don't do that using makedir. If you did that using makedir, you've already failed. And it's cool. We'll sort that out. And then we're going to manage that directory as a Git repository. So let me tell you about how we're going to create that directory. Of course, we're going to use chef to create that directory. But there's this new tool that I'm going to introduce to you. It's a chef tool that happens to be called chef. So when you chef, you can use chef while you chef, because your dog. So chef is this executable. It's a command line tool. Some of you in the past maybe have used knife. Chef and knife have some overlapping functionality. We're not going to talk about knife today. We're going to talk about chef today, because chef is the new hotness. Knife is old and busted. That's not really true. Like, knife still is a valid and good thing, and you should use knife. But the things that we do with chef today, you can also do with knife, but what you should do is get on the bandwagon and do them with chef. And I'll show you why when we get to creating a cookbook. It'll become more clear. But so chef is this executable thing on the command line that I can do a bunch of things with. I can use it to generate chef-specific things, like generate cookbooks, generate my repo. I can ensure that Ruby gems are installed properly and ready for use with chef, and I can do a bunch of other stuff. The chef executable comes with the chef DK, or the chef development kit, which I've already installed on this box for you. If you do chef generate -- help, it will show you the various things that the chef command can generate. So the available generators include an app, a cookbook, a recipe. Is there an available generator that you see that's not on my slide? Policy file, right? I don't have policy file on my slide. The reason I don't have policy file on my slide is not because I ran out of room on my slide. It's because I built this slide before policy files existed. Chef DK is a relatively new thing, and it's undergoing a lot of iterative, fast development right now. A policy file is a brand new thing. It is totally alpha, doesn't actually work right now, and we don't talk about policy files. So the first rule about policy files is you don't talk about policy files. Don't ask me any questions about policy files. In a year's time, I'll come back and teach this class, and it will be nothing but policy files, but we're not ready for that yet. So we can generate a repo, and if you do a chef generate repo -- help, that will give you some information about what you can do when you generate a repo and the various help commands or the various attributes that you can pass to it, which we're not going to talk about. What we're going to do is we're going to generate our chef repo. So these are the commands that I'd like you to type. I'd like you to make sure you're in your home directory. So this should be on your workstation. Your command prompt should start with the word chef. You should be in /home/chef. If you do CD to tilde, that will put you there in case you're not there. But if you type that command and you're already there, it will also put you there. Yes?
Can you use the tilde within the recipe?
Can you use the tilde within the recipe? You're not going to want to use that so much because, yeah, it's going to get confused. Like, that's not, no, don't use that. Don't do that. Yeah. It won't work the way you expect it to work, for sure. Yeah. This is the command we're going to run. We're going to run chef generate repo chef-repo.
Sorry, this is a virtual machine, or
this is on the workstation. So on the node up in the cloud there that you're SSH'd into. You could totally do this on your local workstation also if you have Chef installed. But for the purposes of today, we want to do this up on that workstation. And this will do a thing for you. It will generate a chef repo for you. But how does it generate that chef repo? Like magic, yeah. Now it's not magic, it's just awesome. Chef is awesome, but not magic, right? So it's using chef as it executes chef to create this repo for you. So the cool thing about that is that once you understand how resources work and how recipes work, understanding how these chef generators work, they're just recipes under the covers. So you can actually create your own generators if you have specific requirements for what your cookbooks look like or what your company's chef repo should look like. You could create a custom generator and have that applied when you run this chef generate repo chef repo command. So the next thing that you'll want to do then is commit that repo to Git. But I'm going to just run a couple of things here on my machine, and you can watch, follow along as I do so. So Actually, before I generate my repo, I'm just going to check in on my Git status. Because as it turns out, I have already created a file. I'm sorry, I've already created this as a Git repository. And so I have a bunch of files here that I want to push up to GitHub so that if you're following along, you have them. And after the class, you'll have them as well. So you should not do, or you can do, but you don't have to do what I'm about to do. I'm going to remove some cruft like Foo and Nathan Harvey. And then I'm going to, so Git status, I'm going to git add. The first one we did was hello.rb. So I'm going to add that. Git commit -m hello world recipe. And then I'm going to git add my MOTD. Git commit MOTD recipe. I also have my git.rb, git add git.rb, git commit -m git recipe, and then git status flow.txt. I don't want to actually commit either of those guys, so I'm going to update my git ignore, and I'm going to add .remote. What is it called? Remote-sync. Who can help me? Yeah, remote-sync. JSON. You don't have to do any of this stuff that I'm doing right now. And my hello.txt. I'm going to ignore that also. Yep. Stop watching me type. You're making me mess up. All right, so you just did chef generates chef-repo. Nope, that's not what you did, is it? What did you do? That's what you did, right? Chef generate repo, chef-repo. You did that thing. And it created a chef repo for you. So now what I'd like you to do is cd into your chef repo. And from here, you should execute a git init. So turn this into a Git repository for you. I'm not going to do it because my top level directory is already a Git repository. But after you do a git init, you can do this command that I'm going to do, git add, and then a space and a dot. So let's just add the entirety of the chef repo. And then if you do a git status, it should show you that you have a bunch of new files that are ready to be committed to your Git repo. And so we want to go ahead and commit those. I'm going to do a git commit -m, and then some message about this commit. And I'm going to say the initial chef repo as generated by chef. And then after you've done that, if you do a git status, it should show you something different than mine. It should say that you're clean. Your Git repository is clean. I'm going to do a git push to push this up to that GitHub repository. So again, if you're following along, I have all of that now up here. If we refresh this page, you'll see I have my chef repo directory. It's now on GitHub with everything that we have in there. Okay, that was a lot. including a lot of stuff that you should ignore and then some stuff that you actually had to do. So I want to pause and say, what questions can I answer for you? Yes.
So thank you, make the git commit, right? But since we don't have a remote origin.
Exactly.
Git that, right?
Yeah, you should not do a git push. You can do a git push and it will fail.
Of course.
Right?
it will fail.
Yeah, because you don't have a remote origin set up yet. Now, if you want to go ahead and create like a repository on GitHub for yourself, and then set that up as a remote repository so you can push this stuff as we go throughout the class, you're welcome to do so. But in order to do that, you're also going to have to like create a key on this box or put your key on the box so that you can actually talk to GitHub. Yeah, cool. What else can I answer for you? All right, let's check in on what we've done. So we CD'd into the repo, we did a git init, we added everything, we committed everything. So we've done 2 of our 3 steps. We installed Git, we created our Chef repo. Now we're ready to create a cookbook. How are we going to create a cookbook? With what? What tool are we going to use? Chef. Yeah, of course. We're going to use Chef to generate that. So if you do a Chef generate cookbook -- help, it will give you the help commands, like what do you do to generate a cookbook? Here's what we're going to do. We're going to create an MOTD cookbook. So you should CD into cookbooks, your current working directory. If you type pwd, it should be /home/chef/chef repo/cookbooks. That's where the directory I want you to be in. And once you're in that directory, you can run this command, chef generate cookbook MOTD. And then again, using chef, it's going to generate a cookbook for you called MOTD. And what will you do after that's done? What's the next step?
Create a recipe.
Create a recipe? No. Like, we will do that, but there's a step we have to do first. What's that? Check it into your Git repository, yes. After you've done this, you should check it in. Put it in your source code repository. Like, that's me being a pedantic asshole also. Like, you don't have to check it into Git if you don't want to, but we're gonna do things the right way today. So I'm gonna do the same here. So I'm gonna CD into cookbooks, and my PWD is home, chef repo, cookbooks. I'm gonna do a chef generate cookbook MOTD. And that creates a bunch of stuff for me here. If I do an ls, you'll see that there's now an MOTD cookbook, and I can ls MOTD. And I'll see that there's a bunch of files that were created in there. And so I'm just going to do a git status. I'll see that MOTD is new. You can add that to your Git repository. So I'm going to git add MOTD. And then I'm going to git commit. Add that in, and then I'm going to git push. You won't git push, I will git push. That way, it's all up there. If you're following along and want to grab the code because you prefer to copy and paste, then you can do that. All right, so we did that. Git commit. Okay, so now we actually already wrote an MOTD recipe. I don't want you to retype that recipe. I just want you to use that recipe as part of this cookbook. So you can either copy the MOTD into that cookbook, or you can just run this command. So if you cat ~/motd.rb and then redirect the output to MOTD recipes default.rb, it's essentially going to read that file, take the contents from that file, and append it to the default recipe in our cookbook. I'm going to leave this up here for a minute so you can type that, and then I will execute the same thing. All right, so I'm going to go do that. Cat MOTD to MOTD recipes default. that's done. And then I can open up my MOTD recipes default over here, and we'll see that it now has some stuff that was generated when I did the Chef Generate repo or Chef Generate cookbook. It dropped in the cookbook and the default recipe and that copyright statement. And now I've just catted or appended to that file my MOTD recipe. I'm going to switch over to Atom to edit this file, and I'm just going to do a remote sync. Whoops, remote sync. I'm going to do a download all so that it grabs my Chef repo for me. That's just going to take a second here. It'll be faster for you than it is for me because I have the PowerPoint and the PDF up there. But I now have cookbooks, MOTD, recipes, default.rb. I'm just going to quit out of this here. All right. We're going to change this because our intent, our goal here is to get that property of Chef Inc., that content, moved out of this recipe and into a different file. So let's talk about how we're going to do that. So we're going to use a different resource type now. There are 4 different resource types that can work with files. So there's a cookbook file resource, there's a file resource, which we've already used, there's a remote file resource, and there's a template resource. I want to talk about each one of these different resources and what they can be used for. So a cookbook file resource, you're going to store the contents of your file as part of your cookbook. So if you look at your cookbook, there might or might not be a files directory. There's no files directory yet. But if we wanted to just store that static content in a file within our cookbook, we could create a file or a directory called files, and then in that directory, a default directory, and store the contents of our MOTD there. And that's fine. The problem with that is it's just a static file. So it's whatever we put into that file is what's going to show up on the file system. There's the file resource, which we've already looked at, and there we can specify the content in line. Well, we know we don't want to use this one because the thing we're trying to do is get that content out of being specified in line. There's a remote file resource, and there maybe I'm managing or storing that file up on S3 or something like that. What I want to do is have Chef go out to this remote URL and pull down a file and store that locally on the file system. So you can see here that one of the attributes that we specify for that file is the URL. Where should I go and grab that file from? And then our 4th one is a template. So the template is nice because it's variable content. It's actually going to be an ERB template, and ERB stands for Embedded Ruby. So we can put some variables into this template and have them be rendered properly for us on the file system, which is a nice thing to do also. And there's plenty of applications for that we'll look at here in a bit. And I think that what we're going to do, what we want to do is use the template resource. So we're going to get this set up so that our template is going to have a templates directory with a default directory and an motd.erb file in that directory. We could just create that manually, but of course we're not going to do that. We don't create anything manually like with the make dir command. We're going to use Chef to do that. So in any case, actually here's what a template might look like. Property of, and then some variable company name. So we can set that up. So we're going to use template. It's an ERB, you know, we said all that. All right, so the first thing we want to do is change our recipe. Let's change our recipe so that it's not using a file resource, it's actually using a template resource. So there are 2 changes that you're going to make in your recipe. First, you're going to change the resource type. It says file right now, you're going to change it from file to template. And then instead of specifying the content, you're going to remove that content attribute, and in its place, you're going to put a source attribute. And the source is going to be motd.erb. After we've created or updated that recipe, we'll then go and create the actual template, the motd.erb. So let me go ahead and make my changes here. The file type, we're going to change to a template. And my content, I'm going to change to a source attribute. And that source is going to be the file named motd.erb. The next thing I need to do, though, is actually generate that template resource, that motd.erb file. And so we're going to use Chef to do that. Chef has a generate template command. You can run chef generate template -- help to find out like how can you generate a template. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to cd into your MOTD cookbook. So you should be at chef repo cookbooks MOTD. And within that, we're going to run this command, chef generate template. And when we generate a template, we need to tell it which cookbook to put it in. So we're currently in the MOTD cookbook. We're in that directory, so we're just going to say dot for which cookbook to put it in this cookbook. The name of our template is going to be MOTD. And then we're going to pass this -s flag. What does the -s flag tell it? Anyone remember from running chef generate template help? You can run chef generate template -- help and then tell me what the -s flag. It will copy from a source file. So we already created an MOTD file. I don't feel like retyping that entire file. So I'm going to say generate a template and use the contents of that file as the base for your template. And so when we execute this, it's going to create a file at cookbooks, MOTD, templates, default, motd.erb. And the content of that file is going to start off with the contents that are currently in /etc motd, which should be property of company name. So I'm going to go ahead and run that command myself now. So I'm going to move into the MOTD cookbook. That's where I am. I'm going to do a chef generate template. Put it in this cookbook. Call the template MOTD. And for our source, let's use etc motd. That's going to go ahead and run that command for me and create that motd.erb for me. I'm going to come back to my text editor and do the remote sync download all, just to synchronize that down. And under cookbooks MOTD, we're going to have a new directory here in a second called templates. Default motd.erb, and it should have the contents of that file that we already created.
What's the directory structure?
What's up with that directory structure? Why is it templates and then default? The snarky answer is we love the word default and we like to call everything default in Chef, and so that's what it is. It's default because it's the default place to put it. There is a much longer answer that I'll tell you. Under this template, when Chef executes and you say the source is motd.erb, Chef is actually going to look under your templates directory in a bunch of different directories to find an motd.erb. And the first directory that has it, that matches, is going to be the one that it uses. But here's the sequence that it's going to look at those various directories in. First, it's going to look for a directory that's named the same as the fully qualified domain name for this node. The next thing it's going to look at is a directory that has a name that matches to the operating system and version of this node. So it would look in our case, a folder called CentOS-6.6. If it doesn't find that, then it will look in an operating system like primary version, a CentOS 6 directory. If that's not there, then it will look in a CentOS directory. If that's not there, then it will finally end up in the default directory. I tell you this, and it sounds crazy, 99% of the time, you're just going to use default. Like, it doesn't matter. And that's why, and you don't have to remember that because you're going to use chef generate to generate your templates, and it's going to create the correct directory structure for you anytime. You can read all about that file specificity in the docs, and it'll give you some examples of how you might use that. But that's all I want to say about it, unless you have additional follow-up questions. Like, that's good, right? Yeah. All right. So now, let's see how we're doing here. All right, we have a problem. We want to take this cookbook now and we want to apply this cookbook. How do we apply the cookbook? How do we apply things that we've done before? Chef Apply, right. But there's a problem. Chef Apply doesn't understand cookbooks. Chef Apply only understands recipes. So we have to use a different tool. So I told you earlier that like Chef Apply is not how you're going to manage your infrastructure. It's a great way for us to explore recipes and resources, but it's not the tool that you're actually going to use. So I'm going to introduce you to this new tool. It's called the Chef Client. So the Chef Client is the tool that we're going to use to apply this particular recipe. Now, as the name client implies, it usually works with the Chef server, but it doesn't have to work with the Chef server. So the Chef Client is an executable program. It's also part of the Chef DK, so it's already installed on our machines for us. And it performs all the actions required to bring your node into its desired state. You will typically run the Chef Client on a regular basis. So you'll set it up as a daemon or to run in cron, or you'll set it up as a Windows service. And what that typically means is every 30 minutes, the Chef Client is going to wake up and apply all of your policies. Then it'll go back to sleep for another 30 minutes, wake up, apply all of your policies. And by apply all of your policies, of course, what I really mean is test all of your policies and repair the system if it's out of date or out of line with those policies. So it kind of looks like this. It's 3 o'clock, the node checks in, it runs Chef Client, it gets its run list, these are the policies that should be applied, and it does the test and repair to apply those policies. And then a half an hour later, same thing happens. It wakes up again, it runs the Chef Client, what's my policy, it's a run list, I'm gonna test and repair that. Why do you wanna run the Chef Client on a regular basis like this? What's that? Exactly, you wanna make sure that your system stays in line with policy so that when your policies do change, those changes get implemented within your infrastructure. But when someone logs in and something happens on that box and it moves outside of policy, it comes back in line with policy. So sometimes you'll hear this referred to as configuration drift. The configuration of your machines is going to drift over time. It's going to change. It may be changes that are outside of your control. It may be changes that your coworker logged into the box and made, and that person shouldn't have done that. Bad coworker. Chef is going to fix that for you every time. So Chef Client typically runs in conjunction with a Chef server, but we don't have a Chef server right now. We only have our workstation. So we're going to use what's called local mode for the Chef Client. And as local mode implies, there is no Chef server involved with that. Just one other quick thing about the Chef Client. It usually runs with elevated privileges. So we ran sudo chef apply. So we're running basically as root using sudo to chef apply. We're going to do the same thing with Chef Client. We're going to run it as sudo. You don't necessarily have to run Chef Client as a privileged user. You could run it as a normal user, but there are some things that you need to take into consideration. I'm not going to go into all of those things, but there is a page on the docs that will tell you about how to run Chef Client as a normal user and things that you need to consider. So here's what we're going to do. Let's go back to your Chef repo. So cd:/chef repo. And then we're going to run the Chef Client in local mode. And this is the command that you're going to execute. So sudo chef client -- local -mode. And then we need to tell it which policies to apply. And as the earlier slides indicated, the policies that you should apply are what's called a run list. So we're going to do a -r, and the run list is going to include our MOTD recipe. So recipe MOTD. Yes.
That's just a basic array, right? You can run multiple.
What's that? It's
Is that an array? So you can put in.
Yeah. So if I wanted multiple recipes, I could do recipe square bracket MOTD comma recipe square bracket hello. But we don't have a hello cookbook. Like the only recipe in our chef repo right now is the MOTD recipe. But yeah, because the other thing that you won't do is manage your infrastructure one recipe at a time, right? You'll have a collection of recipes that get applied to each node. All right, I'm going to go ahead and run mine. We're gonna break for lunch very soon now too. It's starting to smell good. Thanks, Lori. What's that? It's vegetarian? All right. Is mine gonna work right now? What's wrong with what I've just done? Anyone know what's wrong? Why is mine gonna fail? I'm in the wrong directory. So I'm just gonna fix that really quick. Did it change the file of your the content of your file? No, why not?
It's already.
Yeah, it's the same as it was, right? We didn't actually change anything. But guess what? If you log out of this machine and SSH back in, now your MOTD is going to be displayed. Riddle me why it didn't work before, but now it does. We didn't change anything about that file. I think that's the case. In my earlier testing, it told me that was the case. Oh, no, it still doesn't work. It worked for yours, but it doesn't work for mine. I don't even MOTD. I don't know. Yeah, it's crazy magic. Okay. I'm not really sure what to tell you about that, but if you cat the file, it will have the right contents. All right, so here's what just happened, right? Chef client on the node said, hey, what policy should I follow? The policy I should follow is my MOTD default recipe. And then it applied that policy using test and repair. So we've completed this lab. We're managing the data for our files separate from the policy. We installed Git, we created a chef retail, and we created a cookbook. So there are a couple of ways, there are a couple of resources that we could use to manage that content separately. We could use the cookbook file, the remote file, or the template. We know a template is an ERB thing, which we haven't looked at exactly how you put ERB in there, but we might look at that today. So what if the contents of the MOTD file should be pulled from a bucket on S3? What resource type would you use? A remote file. A remote file, and it would have an attribute of a URL. And what if the MOTD file should have variable content? What type of resource would you use? You'd use a template resource, right? Okay. Now's when we're going to break for lunch, but I'm going to leave you with a lab as you go to lunch, because I totally believe in working lunches. You should eat, and you should also try to complete this lab. Here's the lab. I want you to create another cookbook, and in this cookbook, I want you to manage NTP on the box. I will tell you that you should use a template to manage the Etsy ntp.conf file, but we actually will accept all of the defaults that come out of the package. And we don't have to change any of those defaults right now. Like, I just want you to use the Etsy ntp.conf that comes with the package installation. And by the way, the package names for NTP on CentOS, there are two. There's NTP and there's NTP date. So you want to write a cookbook, an NTP cookbook. It should have a recipe that installs these two packages. And then it should have a template that manages Etsy ntp.conf. And that URL. So watch for that, or watch the Git repository, and I'll put it there. So if you're on the internet watching us, thank you. Enjoy your lunch.